Chapter 501, Lemurin City, 7. I wrapped my arms around Arthur from behind, holding him like I could physically pull him back from the brink just by wanting it enough. My tears wouldn't stop. They streamed down my cheeks, hot and fast, like someone had finally opened a valve I didn't know existed. Dignity? Gone. Royal decorum? Irrelevant. I was a saintess and a princess, yes, but right now I was just a girl who'd found the boy she loved bleeding into her lap. I hadn't seen him in so long. I'd imagined our reunion differently. I was supposed to surprise him, sweep into Lemurin City with the northern reinforcements like a heroine out of an old epic, kiss him breathless, tease him, maybe steal his cloak just because I missed the way it smelled. I'd imagined the way his eyes would light up at the sight of me. Not this. Not this. He looked half dead. Which, in fairness, was still one half too many. Across from me, Serafina knelt, her silver hair falling forward to hide her expression as she clutched Arthur's hand with white knuckles. I breathed in sharply and the light responded. Golden wings of pure light erupted from my back, fanning out with a mechanical hiss and holy hum that set the very air around us trembling. It wasn't subtle. But subtlety was overrated when the man you loved was bleeding out and had a hole in his chest the size of your fist. Serafina's head snapped up, her ice blue eyes meeting mine. No introductions needed, we'd spent 3 years sharing combat classes and dormitory space. Rachel, she acknowledged, her voice steadier than I would have expected given the circumstances. I didn't bother with pleasantries. Move your hand, I instructed, nodding toward where she clutched Arthur's chest. I need to see the entry point. She complied immediately, shifting her grip to his shoulder instead. My hands glowed as I pressed them against Arthur's chest, directly over the gaping wound where the vampire's blood spear had pierced him. Healing spells flowed like water from a broken dam. I didn't hold anything back. If I could burn my own lifespan to heal him faster, I would. Arthur came first. Always. The battlefield around us was quiet in that strange, high-pitched way that only happened when everything else was too loud. The 3 Mount Hua elders were already dead, reduced to corpses and regrets. Even if they hadn't been, I wouldn't have cared. My priority was Arthur. It wasn't strategic. It wasn't rational. It definitely wasn't what a saintess or a princess was supposed to do. And I didn't care one bit. The golden light from my wings intensified, focusing into needle-thin beams that penetrated Arthur's wound. I could see everything, the shredded tissue, the punctured lung, the shards of bone from shattered ribs. Worse, I could see the strange, ominous darkness that lingered in the wound, blood magic, still working to destroy him from within. Blood corruption, Serafina said, her tone clinical despite the tension in her shoulders. 3rd tier, based on the coloration. 4th, I corrected automatically, the old classroom rivalry surfacing even now. See the fractal patterns at the edges? It's 4th tier, verging on 5th. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Still correcting me after all this time, Rachel? Only when you're wrong, Sarah, I replied. Hold him still, I instructed. This will hurt him, even unconscious. Serafina's grip tightened on his shoulders. I noticed how familiar she seemed with his body, how she knew exactly where to apply pressure to keep him stable. The possessive feeling flared again, hotter this time. How many battles had they fought together while I was away? How many quiet moments had they shared? Arthur's body arched suddenly, a choked gasp escaping his lips as the pure light battled against the corruption. Serafina bent close to his ear, whispering something I couldn't hear over my own singing. Whatever it was, it seemed to calm him, his body relaxing slightly despite the pain. My vision blurred, not from tears this time but from fatigue. Healing this deep, this fast, it took more out of me than most battles. The golden wings flickered momentarily as my concentration wavered. Rachel. A sharp voice cut through my focus. Don't overextend. Lilith Windward stood on the other side of the chamber, her attention split between me and the partially frozen vampire. The legendary Windward looked exactly as she always did, tall, imposing, with golden hair and eyes the color of emeralds. Her armor, crafted from the rare azurite metal found only in the deepest northern mines, gleamed with runes of binding and judgment. I'm fine, I called back, though we both knew it was a lie. Lilith's eyes narrowed, but she didn't press the issue. Instead, she turned her full attention back to the vampire ancestor who was struggling against the ice that encased her lower body. You northern barbarians, the vampire hissed, her aristocratic features contorted with rage. This is far beyond your jurisdiction. The east belongs to the monarch. Funny, Lilith replied, her voice colder than the ice she wielded. I don't see his name carved anywhere. Still looking at the vampire, she called out to me again. Rachel, stabilize and withdraw. I'll handle this quickly. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order from the woman who'd helped train me since I was a child, the woman who was practically family through her bond with my sister Kathleen. I knew she was right. Arthur was stable enough now that he wouldn't die in the next few minutes. The corruption was contained if not fully purged. With a final pulse of golden light, I sealed the worst of Arthur's wounds and withdrew my power. The wings folded back into nothingness, leaving me lightheaded and swaying. He's stable, I told Serafina, who hadn't taken her eyes off Arthur's face. My voice came out more possessive than I'd intended. I've stopped the corruption from spreading, but he'll need more specialized care. My care. If Serafina noted my tone, she didn't comment on it. Thank you, she said simply. I summoned what remained of my healing energy. No wings this time, I didn't have the strength for that display again, but my hands still glowed with gentle golden light as I pressed them against her wound. It's not as bad as it looks, I said after a moment. Clean through, no corruption. As I worked on healing Seraphina, I kept one eye on Lilith and the vampire. It was almost unfair, really. She may have been a vampire ancestor, terrifying, ancient, and very full of herself, but she was still only low immortal rank. And already weakened. Lilith? She was 2 levels above that, and worse, she knew it. Her sword, Frostmourne, carved through blood magic like it was late for something. Vampire ancestor blocked once. Maybe twice. Then she started bleeding for real. This is impossible, she hissed, genuine fear replacing her earlier arrogance. The monarch will send his regards? Lilith finished for her, driving Frostmourne deeper into the vampire's shoulder. I look forward to receiving them personally. It wouldn't be a long fight. The universe had already penciled in the outcome and was moving on to more interesting storylines. But I didn't care about that either. I just felt tired. Not the magical kind. The emotional kind. The kind that sits in your lungs and weighs down your ribs and makes your breath catch in your throat. I should have been faster. I should have been here sooner. I should never have let him be in this state again. With the immediate threat neutralized, Lilith strode over to us, her expression softening slightly as she knelt beside me. You pushed yourself too hard again, she chided, though there was no real heat in her words. She reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face with unexpected gentleness. Kathleen would have my head if I let anything happen to her little sister. I managed a weak smile. I'm fine, Lilith. Really? She clearly didn't believe me but turned her attention to Arthur instead. How is he? Stable but unconscious. The breakthrough to peak integration combined with the vampire's blood corruption. I shook my head. He needs more specialized care. Lilith nodded, then looked at Seraphina. Princess. I am Lilith Windward, leading the Aurora Knights. We come at the request of the Mount Hua sect as allies to the Eastern Coalition. Seraphina inclined her head with perfect formal grace despite her disheveled appearance. Mount Hua welcomes the Aurora Knights, Captain Windward. Your timing was fortunate. We should move him, Lilith interjected. The pavilion isn't secure and he needs proper medical facilities. The northern delegation has a secure compound on the second terrace, I said, already gathering Arthur's limp form into my arms, unwilling to let anyone else carry him. My personal healers are standing by. Seraphina watched me with an unreadable expression. I could see the calculation in her eyes, weighing her position as Princess of Mount Hua against the reality that I wasn't asking permission. I'll come with you, she decided finally. Arthur remains under Mount Hua's protection. Of course, I agreed, my tone making it clear I was allowing her presence rather than requiring it. We're all on the same side here. For now at least. As we made our way out of the blood-soaked chamber, I held Arthur close against my chest, feeling the steady, if faint, beat of his heart. He was alive. He would stay that way. I would make sure of it. Behind us, Lilith dealt with the frozen vampire and the bodies of the fallen elders. There would be time later for mourning, for questions, for the inevitable conflict between my claim on Arthur and Seraphina's. For now he was alive. And really, that was all that mattered. Chapter 502, Double-Teamed, 1. Waking up felt wrong. Not bad wrong. Not your organs are in the wrong order wrong. Just suspiciously right. Like my body had made a few executive decisions while I was unconscious and cleaned house without consulting me. There was no pain. That was the first red flag. The last thing I remembered was Carmilla's blood spear punching through my chest like it was auditioning for a role as a professional holemaker. My muscles should have felt like they'd been through a blender, set to puree, then poured back into my skin. There should have been a stabbing ache in my ribs, a burning tightness in my lungs, the lingering echo of corruption eating through my veins. Instead, warmth. Comfortable, encompassing, almost smug warmth, as if my body was particularly pleased with its new arrangements. Finally awake? Luna's voice sounded in my mind uncharacteristically gentle. You had us worried, breakthrough boy. I blinked slowly, letting my vision adjust to the soft ambient light. The ceiling above me was one of those polished nanometal slabs found only in high-tier healing chambers, clean, reflective, vaguely expensive-looking. The kind that beeped quietly to itself in a language only medical AIs could understand. I should have been in pieces. Not wrapped in warmth like a particularly cherished dumpling. Then I felt it. A weight. No, 2 weights. One on each side. I turned my head slightly to the right first. There, curled up beside me, head resting on my shoulder and silver hair tangled like moonlight against the sheet, was Seraphina. Her face was uncharacteristically vulnerable in sleep, the usual rigid control softened by exhaustion. I could see the telltale puffiness around her eyes. She'd cried. A lot. The realization sent an ache through my chest that had nothing to do with physical wounds. Her hand was wrapped tightly around mine, fingers interlaced, like letting go wasn't an option she'd entertain even in sleep. I turned my head the other way, slower this time, and there, because apparently fate had a sense of humor and symmetry, was Rachel. Oh, this is going to be good, Luna commented with barely suppressed glee. Rachel Creighton. My face flushed as I took in what they were wearing. Seraphina, ever practical even in her sleepwear choices, wore a crop training top and shorts that revealed her toned midriff, the kind of outfit optimized for both comfort and quick movement should an emergency arise. The soft fabric accentuated rather than concealed the lean muscle beneath, testament to years of disciplined training. Rachel, by contrast, wore a flowing nightgown of northern design, diaphanous and delicate, in a shade of blue that matched her eyes perfectly. Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, depending on one's perspective, the material was doing an inadequate job of concealing her considerable assets. I quickly averted my gaze, then found my eyes drifting back of their own accord, then firmly redirected them toward the ceiling. Weak, Luna snickered. Hee hee, a light giggle sounded, making me turn toward Rachel again. She was awake, watching me with sparkling eyes and a knowing smile. You looked, she said, her tone bright with amusement and something warmer. I thought you would be crying, I replied, hoping to divert attention from my obvious lapse in gentlemanly behavior. I cried enough, she countered, propping herself up on one elbow, which did fascinating things to the physics of her nightgown. And I healed you perfectly. She stretched her arms languidly, a motion that seemed deliberately calculated to draw my gaze. It succeeded. Stop staring, Serafina's voice came from my other side, cool and precise. She was awake now too, ice blue eyes taking in the scene with practiced assessment. And horny Saintess, stop showing off. It is only for Arthur, Rachel justified, placing a hand over her chest in a gesture that somehow managed to be both innocent and provocative simultaneously. So it doesn't matter. He can see me any way he wants. Her cheeks flushed pink at her own boldness, but her deep blue eyes remained steady on mine, filled with a warmth that went beyond mere flirtation. And this is a Saintess, Serafina muttered under her breath, just loud enough to be heard, her tone caught between exasperation and something almost like admiration. I could feel the tension building, the peculiar friction that always existed between these two formidable women. Acting on instinct rather than wisdom, I reached out and gently brushed Serafina's pointed ear with my fingertips. Naya. The sound that escaped her was somewhere between a yelp and a squeak as she nearly launched herself off the bed. She clutched her ear, her pale skin flushing crimson from her neck to the tips of her ears. Rachel didn't even try to stifle her laughter. Elven ears are more sensitive when emotional, Serafina stammered, trying to salvage her dignity with an educational statement. I nodded solemnly, as if this had been a purely scientific inquiry on my part rather than a deliberate attempt to disrupt the building tension. Of course, I said, fighting to keep my expression neutral. That's exactly why I did it. For science. Rachel's laughter increased, the sound like crystal bells in the quiet room. I won't yell and run away if you touch me anywhere, Rachel leaned in to whisper, her breath warm against my ear. The softness of her voice carried an unmistakable invitation wrapped in innocent phrasing, a skill she had perfected over years of balancing her role as a saintess with her more personal inclinations. A shiver ran down my spine, my newly enhanced senses magnifying every subtle nuance in her tone. There was something about Rachel's voice that had always affected me, a musical quality that somehow resonated at precisely the right frequency to bypass all rational thought. You're hopeless, Luna commented dryly. One whisper and your brain just shuts down. She wasn't wrong. Especially with Rachel pressed against me, the softness of her form a stark contrast to the firm resolve in her eyes. You seem to have gotten bolder, I remarked, my voice lower than intended. In one fluid motion, I turned and gently pushed Rachel back against the pillows. She let out a surprised yelp that dissolved into a delighted laugh as I leaned over her. The sound of her laughter was cut short as I captured her lips with mine, a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened. I traced the elegant curve of her ear with light touches, discovering with satisfaction that human ears were apparently just as sensitive as elven ones if Rachel's soft gasp was any indication. Her hands tangled in my hair, pulling me closer with surprising strength for a healer. When we finally broke apart, Rachel's breath came in short, uneven bursts, her blue eyes darkened to the color of twilight. The pure saintess of the north looked decidedly unsaintly with her hair mussed and lips reddened from our kiss. It was only then that I registered the soft sound of footsteps moving away from the bed. I turned to see Serafina quietly withdrawing, her expression carefully neutral in that way that meant she was feeling anything but. Where are you going? I asked, reaching out to catch her wrist. Her skin was cool beneath my fingers, a counterpoint to Rachel's warmth. I gently pulled her back toward the bed, more of a request than a demand. Arthur, Serafina began, a complexity of emotions hidden behind that single word. Before she could construct one of her impeccably logical reasons for leaving, I pressed a finger gently to her lips. Now my two princesses, I murmured, looking between them, you should help me recover, right? The playfulness in my voice couldn't entirely mask the genuine question beneath, a request for permission, for confirmation that this tentative balance between the three of us was acceptable. Serafina's ice blue eyes met mine, searching. Whatever she found there seemed to satisfy her because the tension in her shoulders relaxed slightly. Your recovery is a priority, she conceded with that formal precision that always slipped into her speech when she was nervous. Rachel, never one to miss an opportunity, shifted to make room on the bed. The healing process does require close monitoring, she added, her innocent tone belied by the mischievous glint in her eyes. I tugged Serafina down until she was sitting beside me, our shoulders touching. Unlike Rachel's immediate enthusiasm, Serafina's affection had always been more measured, more deliberate, a slow-burning flame rather than a wildfire. I respected that difference, treasured it even. You're ridiculous, she said, but there was no heat in the words. Both of you. Probably, I agreed, reaching up to trace the delicate point of her ear again, this time with deliberate slowness. The effect was immediate, her breath hitched, pupils dilating as she instinctively leaned into the touch despite herself. Rachel watched with fascinated interest. I never realized elven ears were quite that sensitive, she observed with the academic curiosity of a healer combined with the less-than-academic interest of a woman. They're not, Serafina began, then gasped softly as I continued my exploration, finding the exact spot that always made her composure slip. Normally quite this responsive, she finished, trying to maintain her dignity even as a flush crept up her neck. I found myself caught between them, literally and figuratively, as Serafina finally relaxed enough to lean into me. I turned to her, cupping her face gently before bringing my lips to hers in a kiss that contrasted sharply with the heated exchange I'd shared with Rachel. Where Rachel was all passion and enthusiasm, Serafina kissed with precise intensity, each movement deliberate and controlled until the control itself began to slip. When we parted, her eyes remained closed for a moment longer than necessary, a rare display of vulnerability from the princess of Mount Hua. I thought I'd lost you, she whispered, so quietly I almost missed it. We both did, Rachel added, her earlier playfulness subdued as she rested her head against my shoulder. Don't ever do that again, Arthur. Nearly die fighting a vampire ancestor? I asked, trying to lighten the sudden solemnity. I'll do my best to avoid it in the future. See that you do, Serafina said, regaining some of her usual crispness. The paperwork was excessive. I laughed, pulling them both closer. Wouldn't want to burden you with paperwork? The worst part, Rachel said, tracing patterns on my chest that were definitely not standard healing techniques, is that we had to work together to save you. Do you know how exhausting it is to cooperate with someone as stubbornly formal as Serafina? Almost as exhausting as dealing with someone who thinks proper healing protocol is optional, Serafina countered, but there was no real bite to her words. Her hand found mine, fingers intertwining. You loved my unorthodox methods when they saved his life, Rachel pointed out, reaching across me to poke Serafina's side, earning a most unprincess-like squeak. Did you just? Serafina stared at Rachel in disbelief. I did, Rachel confirmed with a grin. You're ticklish. How did I not discover this during 3 years at the academy? Because I never gave you the opportunity, Serafina replied with dignity before a calculating look crossed her face. But I did learn about your weakness for. She whispered something in Rachel's ear that made the saintess turn the exact shade of a sunset. That was one time. Rachel protested, burying her face against my chest. I looked between them, fascinated by this new dynamic. I feel like I'm missing important context here. Good, they said in unison, then glanced at each other in surprise before dissolving into laughter. I found myself laughing with them, the sound filling the healing chamber with a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. For a moment, the complexities of our situation, the war, Sun's betrayal, my transformation, the political implications of our alliance all faded into the background. In this moment, we were just 3 people who cared deeply for each other, finding joy in an unexpected connection. Enjoy it while it lasts, Luna reminded me, though even her mental voice sounded less sardonic than usual. Reality's going to come knocking soon enough. I pressed a kiss to each of their foreheads, treasuring the contrast, Serafina's cool composure and Rachel's warm exuberance, and wondered, not for the first time, how I had become fortunate enough to be caught between these two worlds. Chapter 503, Double Team 2. I said I'm fine, I grumbled, halfway upright, as 2 highly determined princesses tried to flatten me back onto the mattress like I was a particularly opinionated pancake that had gotten ideas above its station. You feel fine, Rachel snapped, planting a knee beside my ribs for leverage, but that doesn't mean you are fine. You literally broke through to peak integration while fighting a vampire ancestor. Do you even remember what that looked like? Serafina nodded along silently, her silver brows furrowed in agreement. Her expression suggested she was calculating the fastest way to medically sedate me with a spoon if necessary, and furthermore, that she had already identified 3 different spoons suitable for the task. I know, I said, lifting my hands in surrender, a gesture that turned out to be premature for reasons I would discover shortly. I'll probably hit Ascendant rank a few months late as a result, but that's fine. I didn't explode, I didn't cough up blood, and my organs appear to be in their factory standard configuration. I feel good. Better than good. Strong even. It was true. The transformation had left me feeling like someone had upgraded my entire operating system without asking permission first. My mana flowed smoother, my reflexes were sharper, and there was a strange new awareness humming beneath my consciousness, as if I could sense the fundamental structure of magic itself. You're also talking like someone who's about to do something spectacularly stupid, Luna observed helpfully in my mind. Which historically is when people like you end up back in healing chambers. Rachel and Serafina looked at each other. Not one of those casual glances, either. This was the kind of exchange that carried the weight of shared battlefields, long campaigns, and far too many conversations that began with, "He's doing what now?" It was a look that said they had anticipated this exact argument and had prepared countermeasures. And then, before my suspicious brain could register the danger, they grabbed my arms with the coordinated precision of 2 people who had definitely planned this. There was a faint click, musical and ominous. I looked down. My hands were cuffed. Ancient-grade mana suppression restraints, to be precise. The kind with actual artistic merit, beautifully crafted bands of null metal inlaid with containment runes that sparkled like trapped starlight. They fit perfectly, which suggested a distressing level of premeditation on someone's part. We all paused to consider this development in stunned silence. In the background of my mind, Luna was absolutely howling with laughter. It echoed across my thoughts like someone had taken the concept of dignity and drop-kicked it into a volcano, then sold tickets to watch it burn. My shoulders twitched as I processed the betrayal. Rachel. Serafina, I said quietly, in the voice people use when talking to cats that have just knocked a priceless heirloom off the table and are now sitting in the pieces with obvious satisfaction. This is for your own good. They both declared in unison, with that exact kind of cheerful, insufferable righteousness that comes from knowing you've technically done the right thing in the most irritating way possible. Then they pushed. I landed on the bed with the majestic plop of a man thoroughly betrayed by the people he trusted to not resort to magical restraints during what should have been a perfectly reasonable discussion about my recovery timeline. My mana flared for a moment in protest, only to fizzle into the void like a candle being snuffed out by a particularly efficient bureaucrat. I blinked at the cuffs, examining the craftsmanship with the sort of professional appreciation one develops after years of having various magical implements used on one's person. Did you two seriously just cuff me with an ancient-grade artifact? Do you have any idea how much these things cost? Serafina gave a very small, very smug nod. Mount Hua's treasury is quite comprehensive. Rachel folded her arms like a satisfied arms dealer who had just closed a particularly lucrative deal. You already did your job. You survived a fight with a vampire ancestor. You made sure the princess of Mount Hua didn't die. Which I might add, no one expected you to manage without at least losing a limb or two. So now you get to rest. But it's war, I pointed out, gesturing with my hands, or at least trying to. It was remarkably difficult to emphasize things when your wrists were shackled like a magical shoplifter caught red-handed with stolen spell components. Yes, Serafina agreed with the patience of someone explaining basic mathematics to a particularly slow student. Which is why we need you healthy, not charging off to single-handedly resolve every crisis that arises. Rachel's smile sharpened in a way that suggested she was enjoying this far more than was strictly professional. Don't worry. We have reinforcements arriving soon. Very strong reinforcements, Serafina added, as if that was supposed to make me feel better and not more concerned about whatever political complications were about to descend on Lumirin. I narrowed my eyes. What kind of reinforcements? The kind that probably involve more people wanting to wrap you in protective padding and keep you in a display case, Luna suggested with obvious amusement. The kind that mean you don't have to solve every problem with your face, Rachel replied, settling onto the bed beside me with the casual ease of someone who had just successfully implemented a long-term strategic plan. So spend quality time with us instead, she continued, already halfway to implementing what appeared to be a calculated campaign of affectionate smothering. Which in her case involved hugging my face directly into her chest like it was a diplomatic peace treaty and I was the designated signature space. She rubbed the back of my head with one hand, the gesture towing that fine line between tender and mildly possessive. It was, I had to admit, an effective interrogation technique if the goal was to make me forget why I had been arguing in the first place. I didn't say anything, mostly because I couldn't. Words had very little chance of making it past where my mouth was currently situated. So I did what any good patient and/or prisoner did. I leaned in and enjoyed it while I could, reasoning that if I was going to be restrained for my own good, I might as well extract what compensation was available. Eventually, Rachel let go, her face glowing in a way that would have caused a lesser man cardiac confusion. Her cheeks were flushed, her smile small and sly, like she'd just stolen the moon and wasn't sure if anyone had noticed yet but was quite pleased with herself regardless. There, she announced with obvious satisfaction. Treatment administered. I feel very treated, I agreed, though the effect was somewhat undermined by my continued state of restraint. Then the door opened. Kathleen Creighton. Rachel's older sister. The heir to the Creighton family legacy and all the diplomatic complications that entailed. 22 years old but carrying herself with the poise of someone who had been attending state functions since before she could properly pronounce international relations. Low immortal rank, which put her in the same general power category as the vampire we had recently fought, though presumably with better intentions and significantly less bloodlust. Her hair was the color of moonlit steel, pulled back in an elaborate arrangement that probably required engineering assistance. Her eyes were like twin ice shards that had learned to disapprove in 12 different languages and were currently working on a 13th. She wore formal northern diplomatic attire, a high-collared coat in the distinctive blue and silver of House Creighton, with enough subtle magical enhancements woven into the fabric to stop most forms of assassination while still looking appropriately elegant for a state function. Ratch, Kathleen began, stepping into the room with the measured grace of someone accustomed to making entrances at important moments before her brain caught up to her eyes and her eyes caught sight of everything. Me flat on the bed like a particularly well-restrained specimen. Rachel, flushed and smiling with obvious satisfaction. Serafina, composed but definitely complicit in whatever had transpired. And the cuffs. Specifically, the glowing, rune-laced cuffs around my wrists, glinting ominously in the soft light like they were here for the plot twist and were quite pleased with their dramatic timing. Kathleen blinked. Once. Slowly. With the deliberate care of someone processing a situation that had exceeded her prepared diplomatic scenarios. Then her hand came up, not dramatically but in the quiet, dignified horror of a noblewoman realizing she had walked into a scene that would require significant mental filing and possibly therapeutic consultation at a later date. She covered her mouth. I apologize, she said, each syllable carefully enunciated like every word was being evaluated for future blackmail potential. I appear to have interrupted an important moment in my sister's personal development. The diplomatic training was evident in how she managed to make personal development sound both completely innocent and utterly damning simultaneously. With a graceful nod more suited to withdrawing from a diplomatic summit than a magical misunderstanding, she turned on her heel and walked out, the door hissing shut behind her like it, too, needed a moment to process what it had witnessed. Silence returned. Thick. Heavy. Embarrassed. Rachel stared at the door with the expression of someone contemplating whether it was possible to retroactively uninvent older sisters. I'm going to kill her, she muttered with the tone of someone who had already begun planning the logistics. I tried to raise my cuffed hands for a sympathetic pat and gesture of comfort and solidarity in the face of familial embarrassment. Failed spectacularly. The cuffs clinked with what sounded suspiciously like amusement. Luna snorted in my head. Again. Of course. Well, she observed with obvious delight, this should make dinner conversation interesting. Chapter 504, Legacy 1. After what could generously be described as a long debate and less generously as a joint interrogation disguised as affection, Rachel and Serafina finally relented. The cuffs came off, complete with a faint shimmer of ancient runes and the sort of hum that usually meant something powerful had once been bound inside them. Hopefully not permanently. In any case, freedom was mine. Limited freedom. The kind that came with a silent understanding that if I even looked at a battlefield, I'd be tackled by two terrifyingly affectionate women and likely cuffed again. We were back at Mount Hua. The Sex Mountains stood tall around us, cold and proud, as if they'd seen empires rise and fall and hadn't been particularly impressed. The sky above was a crystalline blue, the kind that made you feel like the heavens had upgraded their resolution. Lee was waiting for me outside the temple courtyard, hands behind his back, robes flapping gently in the alpine breeze. He looked me up and down like a healer examining a patient who had survived something they absolutely shouldn't have. Arthur. You're recovering well, he said, and relief colored his voice like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. I'm fine, Master Lee, I replied, smiling. My joint still ached like a 3-century-old automaton, but that was beside the point. Lee nodded, then his expression grew serious. The Eastern Continent's calling off student conscription. It's official. I blinked. Wait, why? Isn't the front still crawling with vampires and people who talk like they've been reading villain monologues off ancient scrolls? Things have changed, Lee said quietly, his voice heavy with something I couldn't identify. Magnus returned 3 hours ago while you were unconscious. My heart leaped. He's back? Where's he? Lee's eyes held a weight I'd never seen before. Alone. On the 7th peak. He's been waiting for you to wake up. That single word, alone, carried more meaning than any speech. In Mount Hua, masters didn't isolate themselves on the highest peaks unless something was very wrong. How is he? I asked, though something in Lee's expression already told me I wouldn't like the answer. Lee's silence was answer enough. I found him at the summit of the 7th peak, the highest point in all of Mount Hua. The climb had taken me 2 hours through increasingly treacherous paths, past the tree line, past the snow line, into air so thin it hurt to breathe. But Magnus had always preferred solitude for the important conversations. He sat cross-legged on a flat stone outcropping, facing east toward the distant war-torn lands. His back was to me, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he held himself, like a man made of cracked glass trying not to shatter. Master, I called out, my voice nearly lost in the wind. He turned slowly, and my heart broke. The corruption was visible now, dark veins spreading from a wound on his neck that could only have come from one source. The vampire monarch's final blow. The price of victory. Arthur, Luna whispered solemnly in my mind, her usual sarcasm nowhere to be found. It's bad. Magnus smiled when he saw me, and for a moment he looked like the man who came to Creighton Estate just to ask me to be his disciple. There you are, he said, his voice carrying on the mountain wind. Come. Sit with me. I crossed the distance between us on unsteady legs, settling beside him on the cold stone. Up close, the corruption was even worse, tendrils of darkness creeping toward his heart like ink spreading through water. I killed him, Arthur, Magnus said without preamble, staring out at the horizon. The vampire monarch. Turned him to ash and scattered him to the winds. At what cost? I asked, though I already knew. Magnus chuckled, dry and brittle. Everything. But it was worth it. The war is over. The students can go back to their studies. The children can sleep without fear. He turned to look at me. You can have a life. Master. Let me speak, he said gently. I don't have long, and there are things you need to know. The wind howled around us, carrying the scent of snow and pine. Far below, Mount Hua spread out like a painting, beautiful and eternal. You were my first disciple, Magnus began, his voice taking on the weight of long-buried memory. There was a girl before you. Brilliant. Talented beyond measure. I thought I could save her from the darkness that talent brings. He paused, watching clouds drift across the valley below. She died, he said simply. Mana deviation took her. Her heart demon consumed her from within, and in the end, I had to kill her myself. To spare her the suffering. The words hit me like physical blows. I'd never known. Never suspected. After that, I swore I'd never take another disciple. The pain of losing her, of failing her. I couldn't bear to risk it again. He looked at me then, really looked, as if memorizing my face. Then you came along, he continued. A talent too great to leave alone. He reached into his robes and withdrew a book bound in reinforced leather, its cover inscribed with runes that seemed to shift in the mountain light. This is my grade 6 art, he said, placing it in my hands. The culmination of everything I've learned about the sword. Learn it. Master it. Make it yours. Another book followed, older and heavier, filled with notes and theories scribbled in margins. And this contains my thoughts on your own path. Techniques you haven't developed yet. Movements that exist only in potential. Finally, he stood and unsheathed the sword at his side. Nixthar. Even in the thin mountain air, I could feel the weapon's presence, a legendary grade artifact that seemed to bend reality around itself. The blade was strange, shifting between visible and not, as if it existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. I leave you this as well, Magnus said, holding the sword reverently. It chose me once. I believe it will choose you. Master, I can't. You can, he said firmly. You must. Because what I'm about to show you is the level you need to surpass. He stepped away from me, moving to the very edge of the precipice. The wind whipped his robes around him, and for a moment he looked like a figure from legend, the hero at the end of his story, ready for one final act. I reached it, Arthur, he said, his voice carrying an impossible weight. In that moment when I faced the vampire monarch, when death was certain. I broke through. High radiant rank. I touched the realm of demigods. Impossible, Luna breathed in my mind. But I could feel it now, the change in the air, the way the mountain itself seemed to lean in, as if recognizing the presence of something beyond mortal understanding. This, Magnus said, raising Nixthar toward the sky, is what it means to surpass human limitations. And then he swung. Not at an enemy. Not at any target. Just a single, perfect cut through the air itself. The world shifted. There was no explosion, no dramatic display of power. Just a subtle wrongness, as if reality had skipped a frame. The clouds above us parted in a perfect line. The wind stopped. Even time seemed to hesitate. For the first time in almost 2 centuries, the power of a demigod was felt on Earth. I understood then that I was witnessing something that perhaps a dozen people in history had ever seen. Not just Magnus' final technique, but the peak of human potential made manifest. When the moment passed, Magnus staggered, catching himself on his sword. The corruption spread visibly, racing toward his heart like a tide that could no longer be held back. That's your goal, he said, his voice weak but determined. Not to match me. To surpass me. To reach heights I could only dream of. He turned back to me, extending Nixthar with hands that trembled from more than just exhaustion. Take it, he whispered. And promise me you'll use it to protect what matters. Not for glory, not for power, but for the people who can't protect themselves. I took the sword with hands that shook, feeling its weight, not just physical, but the weight of legacy, of responsibility, of love. I promise, Master. Magnus smiled. Good, he said. Then my work here is done. The corruption reached his heart, and Magnus Drakkar, the martial king, my master, rank 1 of humanity, closed his eyes and let himself fall forward off the cliff. I lunged toward him, but he was already gone, disappearing into the mists below like a figure from a dream. Chapter 505, Legacy 2. Plum blossoms bloomed across the battlefield, not in quiet elegance but as if they'd had enough of being poetic metaphors and decided to become instruments of death. Each swing of Mo Zenith's blade unleashed a storm, petals turned shrapnel, wind turned blade, grace turned carnage. Vampires and cultists were sliced apart with surgical precision, and the blossoms danced through the chaos with all the lethality of an ancient martial art perfected over generations. This was not Mount Hua, not even close, but the Mount Hua sect had brought its mountain with it in the form of Mo Zenith. The man stood at the forefront of the war in the east, his radiant rank power flaring out in surges that left afterimages in the air and silence in the wake of each strike. His silver hair whipped around him like a banner, and his robes, pristine white despite the carnage, seemed to repel not just dirt but the very concept of defeat. For 3 days now, he had led the final assault against the vampire strongholds, methodically dismantling centuries of undead dominion with the patience of a master craftsman. Each strike was calculated, each movement deliberate. This was not the wild abandon of a berserker, but the focused precision of a man who understood that wars were won not through passion, but through perfect execution. And then it happened. A tremor ran through the world itself, not through the earth beneath his feet, but through the very fabric of reality. Mo's blade paused mid-swing, frozen in the air as every instinct he had developed over decades of combat screamed in recognition. He turned slowly, deliberately, his pale eyes scanning not the battlefield but the sky above. The atmosphere shimmered with invisible pressure. Someone had just ascended to a level that had been untouched for 2 centuries. The metaphysical ladder that everyone climbed had gained a new rung, and the world itself was adjusting to accommodate it. Magnus, Emma whispered, the name carrying across the sudden silence that had fallen over the battlefield. Even the vampires had stopped their assault, their instincts recognizing the presence of something beyond their understanding. Mo's hands trembled slightly as he gripped his sword, not from fear, but from the sheer magnitude of what he was witnessing. He had known Magnus Drakkar for 40 years, had watched him climb from a talented young swordsman to the martial king of the East. They had been rivals once, in their youth, competing for the attention of masters and the admiration of peers. But this transcended rivalry. This was witnessing history. The pressure in the air intensified, and Emo felt something he had not experienced in decades: humility. Here he stood, a radiant rank master at the peak of mortal power, and yet he could feel the vast gulf that separated him from what Magnus had just achieved. There was a bitter acknowledgement in that moment, the understanding that no matter how high one climbed, there was always another summit to reach. But alongside the bitterness came something unexpected: pride. Pride in his old friend, his former rival, his fellow guardian of the East. Emo Zenith was a man who bowed to few, but some moments demanded reverence. He lowered his sword and dipped his head, not in submission but in recognition. Around him, the very air seemed to hold its breath, as if the world itself was paying homage to what had just occurred. The vampires, sensing the shift in cosmic balance, began to retreat. Their survival instincts, honed over millennia, told them that something fundamental had changed. The apex predator of the night had just been dethroned by something far more terrible, a human who had transcended humanity itself. The war is won, Emo said quietly, and his words carried the weight of prophecy. At last it is won. But even as he spoke, he felt the subtle wrongness in the mana signature, the shadow of corruption that clung to the edges of Magnus' ascension. Victory, it seemed, had come at a price that made Mo's heart clench with sudden, inexplicable dread. The frozen expanse of the northern continent stretched endlessly under a sky the color of old steel. Here, where the aurora danced between the peaks of mountains that had never known the touch of human civilization, Arden Frost sat in contemplation. His fortress was a study in contrasts, stone foundations supporting structures of gleaming metal and crystal where old magic and new technology existed in perfect harmony. Mana-powered heating systems kept the interior comfortable despite the sub-zero temperatures outside, and reinforced windows offered a panoramic view of the desolate beauty that was his domain. Arden had been meditating when it happened, a daily practice that had kept his mind sharp through decades of isolation and responsibility. The technique required absolute focus, a complete withdrawal from the external world to examine the inner landscape of one's own power. Which made the disruption all the more jarring. The mana in the air convulsed, rippling outward from somewhere impossibly distant yet immediately present. Arden's eyes snapped open, pale blue and sharp as winter ice, as every sensor in his fortress began registering readings that should have been impossible. He rose from his meditation cushion with fluid grace, moving to the great window that dominated the eastern wall of his study. Outside, the aurora had intensified, its normally green and blue lights shot through with veins of gold and silver, as if the very heavens were responding to what had just occurred. Radiant rank power was not subtle. When one of the world's handful of living legends unleashed their full strength, it sent ripples through the planet's mana field that could be felt by every sensitive soul within 1,000 miles. But this was something else entirely. Arden's weathered hand found the bottle of cognac that sat on his desk, a gift from a diplomatic mission to the southern continent decades ago, saved for occasions that might never come. He poured himself a measure, noting how his hand remained perfectly steady despite the magnitude of what he was witnessing. "So you've done it, old friend," he murmured, his voice carrying the weight of 40 years of complicated history. He had known Magnus Drakkar since they were both young men, full of ambition and certainty. For a time, they had even been friends before ideology and circumstance had driven them down different paths. But rivalry had a way of evolving over the decades. What had once been jealousy and resentment had slowly transformed into something more complex, a grudging respect, a distant affection, and acknowledgement that they were two sides of the same coin. The cognac burned as it went down, but it was nothing compared to the burning in Arden's chest. Magnus had always been driven by something that Arden couldn't quite understand, a desperate need to protect others, to stand as a bulwark against the darkness. Arden had called it foolishness once, but now he recognized it for what it had always been: love. Love for the weak, for the innocent, for the world itself in all its flawed beauty. And that love had carried Magnus beyond the boundaries of human limitation. Arden raised the glass in a silent toast, his reflection ghost-like in the reinforced window. Outside, the aurora continued its impossible dance, painting the frozen landscape in colors that had no names. "Magnus Drakkar," he said formally, speaking the name with the reverence it deserved. "The Martial King. The man who proved that legends could still be born." He paused, swirling the cognac in his glass, watching the amber liquid catch the light. "I just wish," he began, then stopped. What was the point of wishes? They were for children and idealists. But still, the words came: "I wish it hadn't taken a war to bring out the best in you. I wish we could have found our way back to friendship before whatever this cost you." Because even from half a world away, Arden could sense the shadow in Magnus' triumph. Ascension of this magnitude didn't come freely. The universe demanded payment for such gifts, and the price was always higher than anyone wanted to pay. He finished the cognac in one long swallow, feeling the burn all the way down. Outside, the aurora was already beginning to fade, the cosmic disturbance settling back into normal patterns. The world was adjusting to its new reality, one in which the impossible had become possible, if only for a moment. Arden stood there for a long time, watching the lights dance across the sky, remembering a younger man with fire in his eyes and a dream of making the world better. Somewhere in the east, that man had just achieved something that would echo through history. And somewhere in the north, his old rival mourned for reasons he couldn't quite name. "Farewell, Magnus," Arden whispered to the wind and the ice and the endless sky. "You magnificent, impossible fool." The words were carried away by the Arctic wind, lost in the vastness of the frozen continent. But perhaps in the way that such things sometimes worked, they found their way to where they needed to go. After all, some bonds transcended distance, time, and even death itself. Chapter 506, Legacy 3. Arthur, it's all right, Rachel whispered softly, her voice carrying that gentle warmth that had always been uniquely hers. Let it out. I held her tightly, my face buried against her chest as the grief I'd been holding back finally broke free. The tears came in waves, each one carrying the weight of loss, of finality, of a future that would never include the man who had shaped me into who I was. Rachel's arms encircled me with infinite patience, one hand tracing slow, soothing circles on my back while the other cradled my head. She didn't try to stop my tears or offer empty platitudes about Magnus being in a better place. She simply held me, a steady anchor in the storm of my grief. Serafina had been called away to handle the diplomatic fallout from the war's end, representatives from various factions demanding meetings, alliance negotiations, and the endless bureaucracy that followed any major conflict. Part of me was grateful for her absence. As much as I loved her composed strength, right now I needed Rachel's particular brand of comfort. Where Serafina was ice and steel, Rachel was warmth and light, the kind of person who could make you believe that everything would eventually be okay even when the world felt like it was ending. He was proud of you, Rachel murmured, her fingers threading gently through my hair. I could see it in his eyes when he looked at you, even that first time we met. He knew he was leaving his legacy in good hands. The words broke something loose in my chest, and I cried harder, my tears soaking through the soft fabric of her nightgown. She didn't complain, didn't pull away. If anything, she held me closer, as if she could absorb some of my pain through sheer proximity. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time felt meaningless in that space between grief and comfort, between loss and love. Eventually, the tears slowed, leaving me feeling hollow but somehow cleaner, like a wound that had finally been properly drained. I'm done, I said quietly, my voice muffled against her chest. With crying? Rachel asked gently. Because that's perfectly normal after. With the war, I clarified, lifting my head to meet her eyes. I'm done fighting. Rachel's eyes widened, surprise evident in her expression. Of all the things she might have expected me to say, this clearly wasn't one of them. Arthur, what do you mean? I pulled back slightly, though I remained in the circle of her arms. The vampire monarch is dead. Magnus made sure that before. I swallowed hard. Before he left us. The war will scale down now, they're already ending student conscription. The immediate crisis is over, and he was right about something else too, I need to grow. Not through battle, not through conflict, but through understanding. But you're already so strong, Rachel protested. Your breakthrough to peak integration, the way you fought Carmilla. Strength isn't just about rank or combat ability, I interrupted, shaking my head. Magnus showed me something on that mountain. When he demonstrated his power, I realized how much I still don't understand. About magic, about the world, about myself. Rachel studied my face with those perceptive blue eyes of hers, reading the determination beneath the grief. You're serious about this? Completely. I took her hands in mine, feeling the calluses from her staff work alongside the softness of her healing touch. Magnus spent his final breath showing me the level I need to reach. Not through rushing into every skirmish with the remaining vampire covens, but through patient cultivation, through learning, through becoming more than just another warrior with a sword. What will you do instead? She asked quietly. I looked toward the window where the peaks of Mount Hua stood silhouetted against the morning sky. Train. Study. Master the techniques he left me. Understand what it truly means to surpass human limitations. I turned back to her. And maybe learn to live a life that he would have wanted for me. One with purpose beyond just survival. Rachel was quiet for a long moment, processing this revelation. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but certain. Then I'll stay with you. Rachel? No arguments, she said firmly, though her tone remained gentle. You think I came all this way, risked a diplomatic incident, and helped heal you back from the brink of death just to watch you disappear into hermit training? The northern continent can spare one saintess for a while. Despite everything, I found myself smiling for the first time since Magnus' death. Your family won't be happy about that. My family will understand, she replied with quiet confidence. And if they don't, well, they'll learn to. Her expression grew more serious. Besides, you'll need someone to keep you grounded. To make sure you don't lose yourself in pursuit of transcendence. Masters have a tendency to become distant. The implication hung in the air between us. She was right, of course. The path Magnus had shown me was one that could easily lead to isolation, to the kind of detachment that came with ascending beyond mortal concerns. Having Rachel there, with her warmth, her humanity, her ability to make me laugh even in the darkest moments, would be invaluable. And Serafina? I asked. Rachel's expression grew complex. That's complicated. She has responsibilities here, to Mount Hua, to the eastern continent. The immediate crisis may be over, but there will still be cleanup operations, political realignments, dealing with the remaining vampire covens. She paused. But I think she'll understand your choice. Maybe better than anyone. I nodded, feeling a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying begin to lift. The decision felt right in a way that joining battles never had. This was what Magnus had wanted for me, not to be a weapon in someone else's war, but to become something greater, something worthy of the sacrifice he'd made. Thank you, I said, squeezing Rachel's hands. For understanding. For staying. She smiled then, radiant and warm as summer sunlight. Where else would I be? You're stuck with me, Arthur. For better or worse? Definitely for better, I murmured, pulling her close again. This time, when I held her, it wasn't grief that drove me but gratitude. Gratitude for her presence, for her understanding, for the future we might build together away from the remaining chaos. Magnus was gone, but his final gift, the knowledge of what I could become, remained. Chapter 507, Legacy 4. I wasn't expecting a message from my father. Especially not one that read like a report and hit like a hammer. The eastern continent was different. I'd arrived with the northern reinforcements, the windward contingent. The Cretans had already split off to support Mount Hua, like dutiful nobles with a sense of timing slightly worse than ours. We were sent to Warian, what used to be vampire territory, until the Kagu family decided to blow half their remaining strength retaking it. It had been the crown jewel of the East. The heart. The seat of politics and martial pride. Reclaiming it had cost them dearly. A Pyrrhic victory if ever there was one. I stood still, boots planted on cracked asphalt reinforced with mana-conductive steel. Around me, transport drones buzzed, lifting body bags like they were cargo, not corpses. Which in this war, they basically were. The air tasted of ozone and iron, the metallic tang that comes after too much magic has been unleashed in too small a space. The Kagas lost their place among the seven, I thought, watching a line of them, mages, knights, civilians, being zipped up and taken away. The family that birthed the first hero, Liam Kagu, the man whose legend still cast a continent-sized shadow. And now? Their radiant rank matriarch lay comatose, and their void vanguard was a shattered spear. It wasn't just a loss, it was history ending with a whimper. Which annoyed me more than I cared to admit. Because I'd wanted to surpass them. I'd wanted the Windwards to eclipse the Kagas in broad daylight, not inherit their position after they'd already dimmed and faded into myth. There was no glory in claiming an empty throne, no satisfaction in being handed power rather than seizing it. Lucifer. I turned at the voice and my breath caught slightly, a reaction I'd been having more and more lately whenever she appeared. Seola Moyong approached with her usual grace, like someone had programmed her footsteps to avoid stepping in blood by nanometer precision. Her black hair was pulled back in a perfect military style, revealing the elegant line of her neck, and her golden eyes held that same enigmatic depth that had been driving me to distraction for months. She wore the formal robes of the Moyong family, deep blue with silver embroidery that caught the light as she moved. Even in this devastated landscape, she looked like she belonged in an imperial court rather than a battlefield. You came with reinforcements, she said, her voice measured as always. Like she was reading dialogue from a diplomatic briefing. Or a tragedy. But there was something else there now, something I'd begun to notice in our recent exchanges, a warmth that hadn't been there before, carefully hidden beneath layers of political training. I nodded, forcing my expression to remain neutral. Though it's a bit late? She shook her head, those golden eyes softening slightly. It's not your fault. I know how much you wanted to be here. To fight. Her gaze lingered on my face a moment longer than strictly necessary. To help. The way she said that last word made something flutter in my chest, a recognition that maybe, just maybe, she understood more about my motivations than I'd given her credit for. Thanks, I said, and gave her what I hoped was a casual smile. She looked away just for a second. Not out of awkwardness. More like someone looking into the sun and needing to blink. When she looked back, there was a faint color in her cheeks that definitely hadn't been there before. Still, she didn't know. Most people didn't. That was the part one couldn't get over. Even the Moyongs haven't heard, I thought, the weight of the secret pressing down on me. Magnus Dracar had killed the vampire monarch. Not wounded. Not repelled. Killed. The strongest vampire on Earth dead. And Magnus? The martial king? He'd done it by pushing through to high radiant rank. The first human to do so since the first hero Liam Kagu, 200 years ago. Magnus had crossed the line. He'd broken the wall the rest of us were still trying to climb. And then, like any good tragic figure, he died. Burned too bright, too fast. Too human. With him gone and the Kagu matriarch down for the count, that left 9 radiant ranks in the world. Just 9. Out of billions. And for the first time in my life, I realized we weren't running out of enemies. We were running out of heroes. How's Dia? Seola asked, with the kind of calm that could be mistaken for indifference if you didn't know she had enough emotional discipline to win awards for it. But I did know her, had spent enough time studying her expressions to catch the slight tightness around her eyes when she spoke that name. The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications neither of us was quite ready to address directly. She's... I paused, thinking of Dia's laugh echoing through the northern fortress, the way she'd started stealing my coats because they smelled like winter winds, how she'd begun unconsciously seeking my hand whenever we walked together. She's good. Better than good, actually. She's adjusted to the north better than most people expected. I watched Seola's reaction carefully, noting the way her hands clasped behind her back, a tell I'd learned meant she was fighting to maintain her composure. She's got her people now, I continued, partly to fill the silence and partly because I genuinely wanted Seola to understand. The ones we evacuated from the Southern Sea's Sun Palace. The ones who still think being human means more than just not having fangs or scales. She's found a place there. Found purpose. What I didn't say was how Dia had also found her way into my arms on cold northern nights, how her presence had transformed my austere fortress into something that felt like home. How she'd started wearing the windward colors not out of political necessity but because she claimed she liked the way they looked on her. How she'd been teaching me the dances of her homeland while I taught her the martial techniques of mine. Ciela nodded slowly, but I caught the way her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She understood the subtext, even if neither of us was ready to make it explicit. Of course she did. Everyone with a working brain knew returning Dia to the east would be impractical. The war here had only lasted a few months, but it had chewed through the continent like a data worm through outdated firewalls. The east hadn't just lost cities or soldiers, it had lost face. And power. And patience. And in the vacuum that followed, people were going to look for someone to blame. Someone not quite like them. Someone like Dia. I don't want her living somewhere she's just going to be a target, I added, and the protective edge in my voice was probably more revealing than I'd intended. The north is safer. I can protect her better there. The admission hung between us like a challenge. Ciela's golden eyes studied my face with an intensity that made me feel exposed, as if she could read every emotion I was trying to keep buried. You seem to have gotten quite close, she said finally in a tone so carefully neutral it might have been forged from stainless steel. But there was something underneath it, hurt, maybe, or disappointment. Something that made my chest tighten with an emotion I wasn't ready to name. Well, we had to, I replied, scratching the back of my head in that universal gesture of yes, this is awkward, but I am doing my best. We've been in the north for months. Things happen. Bonds form. I met her eyes directly, willing her to understand what I couldn't quite bring myself to say. We're not exactly social hermits. The truth was more complicated than that, of course. Yes, Dia and I had grown close and possibly wonderfully close. She'd brought warmth to the cold northern peaks, laughter to the austere halls of my family's fortress. She'd made me want things I'd never thought I could have. But standing here, watching the careful way Ciela was holding herself, seeing the pain she was trying so hard to hide behind diplomatic training, I realized that what I felt for Dia wasn't the only thing complicating my life. Ciela didn't respond immediately. Just kept her gaze drifting like a surveillance drone, trying not to look interested. Which, knowing her, might have actually been the case. But when she finally looked back at me, there was something raw in her expression, a crack in the perfect mask she always wore. I'm glad she's safe, Ciela said quietly, and I believed her. Despite whatever personal feelings might be involved, she genuinely cared about Dia's well-being. It was part of what made her so impossible to forget. I'm glad you were there for her when she needed someone. The words were generous, gracious even. They were also clearly costing her something to say. Before I could figure out how to respond, before I could untangle the mess of emotions churning in my chest, the sound of approaching footsteps cut through the heavy atmosphere like a well-placed sword stroke. Lucifer. The voice was unmistakable. I turned, grateful for the interruption even as I felt Ciela step slightly away from me, rebuilding the careful distance we'd been maintaining. There he was, Rinkagu. Still had that perfectly unruly hair like he'd just walked out of a holodrama, still had those violet eyes that somehow managed to look noble and annoyed at the same time. But there was something different about him now, something that spoke of trials endured and prices paid. He looked stronger, not just in the way integration rankers always do with their denser auras and tighter movements, but in the way that said he'd seen things. Done things. The kind of things that leave marks even if you can't see them. Run. Sorry for being late, I said, pushing thoughts of golden eyes and complicated feelings to the back of my mind. This wasn't the time or place for such considerations. It was our duty to protect our own continent, he replied evenly. His voice hadn't changed much, but there was a weight behind it now. Less teenage prodigy, more tired commander who'd learned that victory and defeat weren't always as different as people liked to pretend. His eyes shimmered faintly with power and history. And something else, maybe quiet pride, maybe sadness. Maybe both. I could see the burden he carried, the knowledge that the East had paid a terrible price for its freedom. The North stands ready to help with reconstruction, I said formally, falling back on diplomatic protocol because it was safer than examining the complicated tangle of my personal life. Whatever the Eastern continent needs. Ren's expression softened slightly. Thank you. We'll need it. As we stood there amid the ruins of Warian, I couldn't help but think about the strange paths that had brought us all to this moment. Ren had his own complicated relationships to navigate. I'd heard enough rumors about his situation with the Mount Hua princess and the Creighton saintess to know I wasn't the only one dealing with matters of the heart in the middle of a war. The East had paid its price. Now the North was here to help clean up the pieces. And maybe, in the process, I'd figure out what to do about the fact that my heart seemed to be pulling me in two different directions at once. Chapter 508, Warian Banquet 1. The war in the East would continue, but everything had changed. Student conscription was ending as reinforcements poured in from the North and the Slaymark Empire. The Kaga family had led a massive, brutal campaign to win back Warian, the eastern capital, from the vampires. It was a Pyrrhic victory they'd won, but at a terrible cost. With the vampire monarch dead and Alisara Velcroix nowhere to be found, the eastern continent could finally push back the vampire tide. Two radiant rankers now protected the East, and normalcy might return to a continent that had slept peacefully for over 150 years. Tonight's massive celebration banquet served two purposes, lifting everyone's spirits after the bloody victory at Warian and welcoming Archduke Leopold Astoria from the Slaymark Empire. The banquet at Warian was no ordinary affair. Archduke Leopold Astoria's presence elevated it to an event of tremendous importance. Among the 11 humans who had reached Radiant rank, 1 ruled as emperor. Of the remaining 10, 7 bore the title of king, a mark of their unmatched power and sovereignty. Yet 3 had refused the title: Eva Lopez, the headmaster of Mythos Academy; Charlotte Alaric, the head of the Tower of Magic; and Leopold Astoria himself, known as the Radiant Lion. Leopold's refusal of the title did nothing to reduce his standing. In truth, he held enough power to claim kingship at any moment and carve out his own domain, splitting from the Slaymark Empire entirely. This unspoken possibility hung over the empire's politics like a shadow, influencing every major decision. Even Quinn Slaymark, the current emperor, had made several desperate and poorly thought-out choices to secure Astoria's loyalty, or at least prevent his rebellion. One such decision was the disastrous engagement between the Crown Prince and Alara Astoria, the Archduke's beloved daughter. What began as a strategic alliance eventually spiraled into a civil war that nearly tore the Slaymark Empire apart. One of my long-term goals was to prevent the civil war that would otherwise tear apart the Slaymark Empire's future. To do that, I needed to earn the Archduke's trust and build a relationship with the man who held such power over the Empire's fate. Over the years, I'd crossed paths with most of the Radiant rankers with varying results. Among them, the one I shared the closest bond with was Magnus Dracar, a rank 1, the pinnacle of human strength. But Magnus was gone now, having paid the ultimate price to kill the vampire monarch. I couldn't help but smile wryly as a thought crossed my mind. Dating the daughters of 3 overprotective Radiant rank fathers might not be my wisest life choice. The thought was both amusing and slightly terrifying. I adjusted my black tie and inspected my reflection in the mirror. The tailored suit was sharp, the cut precise and elegant. It was fitting for the occasion, a banquet of considerable importance and, undoubtedly, endless politics. With a final tug on my tie, I stepped back, composing my expression. The evening promised to be eventful, and I intended to make the most of it. Whatever tensions or trials awaited, I would face them head-on. After all, that was what I'd always done. But first, I had the honor of escorting my 2 dates for the evening, both of whom happened to be princesses. Not that their titles mattered to me. I smiled at the thought. Serafina and Rachel could have been anyone, royalty or not, and I would still feel the same way about them. It wasn't their crowns or noble bloodlines that drew me to them, it was who they were as people, every word, every glance, every unspoken moment we shared. Once I had admired them as characters in a novel, distant figures etched in imagination. Now I loved them as real people, vibrant and complex, shaping the moments of my life in ways I never expected. As I made my way to the first destination, anticipation sparked within me. Tonight wasn't just about the banquet or the Archduke's arrival, it was a rare break from the chaos of war. A chance to breathe, to reconnect, to let the weight of responsibility ease, if only for a few hours. Serafina was waiting for me first. The sight of her stole my breath for a moment. She wore a flowing dress of pale silver, the fabric catching the faintest light and shimmering like moonlight on water. Her silver hair, usually cascading freely down her shoulders, was pinned back just enough to reveal the graceful line of her neck. When her ice-blue eyes met mine, they softened with a warmth she reserved for only a few people in this world. "You clean up well," she teased, a playful smile curling her lips as her gaze swept over my formal attire. "Though I didn't expect you to make it on time." "I aim to surprise," I replied, extending my arm to her in a formal gesture. "Shall we?" She slipped her hand into the crook of my elbow, her touch light yet somehow grounding. "Rachel will never let you hear the end of it if you're late for her." "Then we'd best not keep her waiting," I said, smiling as we set off together down the elegant corridors. When we arrived at Rachel's quarters, I found her waiting by the door, a vision of golden elegance. Her gown was adorned with delicate embroidery that shimmered like starlight against the rich sapphire fabric. Her golden hair was swept up in an intricate style that framed her face perfectly, highlighting her striking sapphire blue eyes. She looked ethereal and regal, yet in the way she glanced at me, there was a vulnerability that made her feel entirely human. "You're late," she said, her lips pursed in mock irritation, though I could see the smile threatening to break through. "Not a second," I countered, glancing at my watch with exaggerated precision. "I think I deserve some credit for punctuality." Rachel's smile broke through her pretense of annoyance as she stepped forward. Her gaze flicked to Serafina, who smiled back with a gracious nod. Despite the complex web of emotions between us all, there was a sense of mutual respect and understanding between the two of them that always left me grateful. "Well, don't just stand there," Rachel said, slipping her arm through my other one with practiced elegance. "We've got a banquet to attend, and I'll not have you forgetting who your first dance belongs to." Serafina chuckled softly. "You'll have to fight me for the second." I shook my head with a laugh. "You two really know how to keep a man on his toes." We entered the banquet hall together, and predictably all eyes turned toward us. It was to be expected, walking in with 2 princesses, each luminous in their own right, was bound to draw attention. And well, I wasn't exactly someone who blended into crowds myself. The whispers, the glances, the subtle nods of acknowledgement from various nobles and dignitaries, it all blurred into a background hum I'd grown used to by now. The banquet hall itself was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting warm light over polished marble floors. Tables draped in fine silk were arranged in perfect order, each set with gleaming silverware and delicate porcelain. The walls were adorned with banners representing the various noble houses and allied factions, creating a tapestry of political alliances made visible. Scanning the room, my gaze landed on a familiar trio. Lucifer Windward stood with Seola Moyong, Arya Gu and Rinkagu, their presence a quiet statement of their own considerable status. I noticed other familiar faces throughout the crowd, representatives from various Eastern families, northern dignitaries who had arrived with the reinforcements, and imperial officials from the Slaymark Empire. Each group maintained their own subtle territories within the hall, creating an invisible map of political relationships and rivalries. My observations were interrupted by the sharp, clear chime of the speaker's announcement, resonating across the grand hall and cutting through all conversation. His Grace, the Radiant Lion, Archduke Leopold Astoria, is now entering. All movement ceased as the room collectively turned toward the main entrance. Conversations died mid-sentence, wine glasses paused halfway to lips, and even the servants stopped their quiet movements. The very air seemed to thicken with anticipation and respect. Leopold Astoria made his entrance with the kind of quiet authority that didn't need to demand respect, it simply commanded it by existing. His auburn hair caught the light from the chandeliers, complementing the striking depth of his violet eyes, which seemed to take in everything while revealing absolutely nothing. His tailored three-piece suit was impeccably cut, adorned with subtle gold embroidery that whispered elegance rather than shouted wealth. Draped around his shoulders was a magnificent fur scarf, an almost regal touch that underscored his towering presence without appearing ostentatious. Leopold moved with measured purpose, his violet eyes scanning the crowd with an unreadable expression. The first to approach him, as protocol and wisdom demanded, were the heads of the Moyong and Gu families. Behind them, other family heads and dignitaries formed a careful queue, waiting their turn to pay respects to one of the most powerful men alive. The hierarchy was clear and unspoken, radiant rankers existed in a realm apart from ordinary nobility, and Leopold Astoria was royalty even among them. For my part, I simply observed from my position with Serafina and Rachel. Chapter 509, Warian Banquet 2. Leopold maintained his stoic demeanor as he exchanged pleasantries with the two family heads. He found their manner far more tolerable than the courtly excess of Avalon's nobility. These leaders had been tempered by the ongoing war, their words and actions stripped of unnecessary flourishes. It was a refreshing contrast to the nobles of the Slaymark Empire's heart who had grown soft in their unchallenged comfort. Central's aristocracy seldom faced the grit and chaos of true battle. They played their games in lavish halls, insulated from the harshness of the world. Even the East, until the Vampire War, had enjoyed relative peace compared to the relentless strife faced by the North, West, and South. Leopold himself had seen his share of combat, skirmishes with miasmic species, and the occasional border conflicts with other regions. Yet, his experience was limited compared to those forged in unending war. Perhaps that was why he loathed Avalon's nobles so deeply. When the formalities with the two heads concluded, Leopold was greeted by another presence. Kathleen Creighton, heir to the powerful family that ruled half of the North, approached with poise. She has grown, Leopold thought, noting her silver hair catching the light like frost under the sun. She had recently broken through to immortal rank, placing her among the top 100 strongest humans in existence, a feat all the more impressive at her age of 23. I trust your time at the Tower of Magic was enlightening? Leopold asked, his voice measured. It was. Kathleen replied with a faint smile. Archmage Charlotte was a brilliant mentor. I learned a great deal under her guidance. Leopold inclined his head. Kathleen's enthusiasm for magic seemed to outweigh her family's historic rivalry with the Tower of Magic, a fact that intrigued him. As she bowed and departed, Leopold's gaze followed her for a moment, thoughtful. The next to greet him was Sun Zenith, the rising star of the Mount Hua sect. Leopold's expression betrayed a flicker of surprise. Quasi-immortal rank, he noted silently, his eyes narrowing as he studied the young man. Sun was in that peculiar liminal stage, perched between the pinnacle of ascendant rank and the threshold of immortal rank. His body had yet to undergo its second metamorphosis, but his sword heart had already given rise to a sword domain, a rare and extraordinary achievement. Ridiculous talent, Leopold mused, though he kept his face impassive. At 22, Sun Zenith was on the cusp of immortality, a level of progression that defied reason. Yet something about the young swordsman's bearing unsettled Leopold. There was an edge to his confidence that felt out of balance. He kept his reservations to himself, offering only a polite nod as Sun moved on. Finally, a familiar figure approached, Lucifer Windward, heir to the Windward family. Leopold regarded the young man thoughtfully. I've heard of your remarkable achievement, he said, his tone neutral but laced with gravity. To defeat a low ascendant rank bishop without scaling the wall is the stuff of legends. Congratulations. Lucifer inclined his head in acknowledgement, his verdant eyes gleaming with quiet pride. So many remarkable talents in one generation, Leopold thought. Lucifer's talent was monstrous, an achievement so singular it rivaled even Arthur's own breakthrough. The two stood nearly equal in their unprecedented abilities, both had shattered barriers thought impossible. Yet here was Lucifer, seemingly overshadowed despite his earth-shaking accomplishments. Leopold's gaze lingered on both young men, his thoughts turning contemplative. Two heroes in one generation, he mused. The prophecies speak of only one, but perhaps. The uncertainty gnawed at him. Which of these two would claim the mantle of the prophesied hero? Or would fate surprise them all? But as Leopold's eyes settled on Arthur Nightingale, a different kind of recognition stirred within him, something deeper and more visceral than mere admiration for talent. I genuinely find myself astounded by that young man, Leopold thought, and suddenly, unbidden, a memory surfaced. The sensation hit him like a physical blow. The memory of Magnus Drakar's sword, that legendary blade cutting through the very fabric of reality when the martial king had reached high radiant rank just before his death. Leopold had felt it despite not being there, had felt the oppressive weight of that transcendent technique, the way it had made even space itself seem to bend and buckle. And now, watching Arthur, Leopold felt an echo of that same sensation. Not the full weight, not yet, but the promise of it. The potential for something that could one day rival even Magnus Drakar's legendary peak. The realization sent a chill down Leopold's spine. This boy could very well reach high radiant rank, Leopold speculated. Perhaps even beyond. The idea was audacious, yet here was Arthur, a young man who made the audacious seem inevitable. After Lucifer stepped aside, it was Arthur's turn to approach, flanked by the two princesses who walked with regal poise at his sides. I greet his grace, Arthur said, bowing deeply, while Rachel and Seraphina dipped into lighter, yet perfectly respectful bows befitting their royal status. Leopold inclined his head in return. I greet Her Highness Rachel, Her Highness Seraphina, and Arthur, he said, his tone even but unmistakably sincere. Your achievement in holding back an immortal rancor has reached far and wide, Arthur. It was nothing short of extraordinary. Leopold's words were entirely genuine. When he first read the report of the battle, his surprise had been so visceral that the cup of coffee he had been holding had shattered in his grip, spilling its contents unnoticed. A boy, not even of age, had survived combat with a low immortal rank vampire ancestor. Even acknowledging that the opponent might not have been fighting at full strength, the feat was remarkable, unprecedented even. Arthur Nightingale has already contributed more to this war than most seasoned warriors ever could, Leopold thought, his eyes steady on the young man before him. The boy's accomplishments weighed heavily on his mind, each one a testament to a talent that defied conventional understanding. Killing a low ascendant rank vampire. Slaying a mid-ascendant rank vampire. And now holding his ground against an immortal rank vampire. These were not the accolades of a prodigy, they were the legacy of a rising legend. And Arthur had achieved all of this before crossing the threshold into adulthood. Leopold nodded slightly, the smallest gesture of respect as he appraised the trio before him. Among them it was Arthur who stood out most, not for his title or his companions, but for the quiet, undeniable power he carried. Thank you, Your Grace, but I still have much to achieve, Arthur replied, meeting Leopold's gaze squarely. Leopold studied him, his sharp violet eyes searching for any trace of hubris in the boy's demeanor. What he found instead surprised him. Not a shred of pride, he mused. Arthur's gaze was clear and focused, unclouded by arrogance or self-satisfaction. Despite the extraordinary heights he had already reached, his demeanor spoke of someone who saw his current strength as merely a stepping stone. He was relentless, unyielding in his pursuit of growth. Leopold's thoughts turned briefly to the young women flanking Arthur, their presence commanding in their own right. He discreetly glanced at Seraphina and Rachel, regal and poised, standing alongside him. And then there's Princess Cecilia and Lady Rose as well, Leopold mused, shaking his head slightly as another thought crossed his mind. Ilara. The memory of his daughter, Ilara Astoria, danced unbidden through his thoughts. She had shown a curious interest in Arthur after their brief encounters at formal events. It was nothing yet, fleeting moments of admiration, perhaps, but Leopold's instincts stirred uneasily. I need to keep her away from him, he decided firmly. Not out of disdain for Arthur, but out of a pragmatic concern. The young man was a magnet, effortlessly drawing others into his orbit. And why wouldn't he? His unparalleled strength, coupled with his undeniable charisma, had already ensnared 4 of the most influential young women in the world, Cecilia Slaymark, Seraphina Zenith, Rachel Creighton, and Rose Springshaper. He's far too skilled at winning hearts, Leopold admitted to himself with a begrudging respect. It wasn't just his power that captivated, it was his unwavering resolve, his grounded humility, and his relentless drive. If anyone could navigate the intricate web of alliances, rivalries, and emotions that defined their world, it was Arthur Nightingale. Leopold's determination solidified. He would ensure Ilara kept her distance. Arthur was a force to be reckoned with, and even those closest to him could find themselves swept up in the storm. Sadly for Arthur, his goal of getting in the Archduke's good books wasn't going according to plan. Chapter 510, Warian Banquet, 3. The evening had settled into the comfortable rhythm of high society mingling when chaos decided to make an entrance. It started with a commotion at the main doors, not the respectful silence that had greeted Archduke Astoria, but the kind of confused murmuring that happened when protocol went out the window. Guards were speaking in hushed, urgent tones to someone just outside the hall, their voices carrying an undertone of "this really isn't how these things work." I had just finished greeting the Archduke when the doors burst open. For figures strode into the banquet hall like they owned the place, completely ignoring the scandalized expressions of the doormen who had clearly failed to stop them. They moved with the confident ease of people accustomed to going wherever they pleased, regardless of invitations or propriety. My glass paused halfway to my lips as recognition hit me like a thunderbolt. Gene Ashbluff led the group, his black hair impeccably styled and his dark eyes surveying the room with calculating precision. He wore formal Western attire, a deep navy jacket with silver accents that somehow managed to look both elegant and vaguely militaristic. His expression was its usual mask of controlled indifference, as if crashing a diplomatic banquet was simply another item on his daily schedule. Behind him, Callie Malekith sauntered in with her trademark smirk, her black hair flowing loose around her shoulders in deliberate defiance of formal styling. Her dark eyes sparkled with mischief as they scanned the crowd. Her dress was Western fashion, elegant but practical, with subtle armor elements worked into the design that most people would miss. She looked like she was already planning to start an argument with someone, preferably me. Elias Vance followed with his characteristic perfect posture, somehow making their dramatic entrance look organized and intentional. His dark hair was impeccably styled, his formal wear absolutely flawless, and he carried a leather portfolio as if he'd simply arrived for a scheduled meeting. Even crashing a party, he managed to look like the most competent person in the room. And finally, Reika Solien glided in with that serene grace that made her seem like she was floating rather than walking. Her long violet hair was arranged in an intricate style that probably required an hour of careful work, and her gown was a masterpiece of subtle elegance. But it was her eyes that caught me, those remarkable violet eyes with their unique flower-like patterns that seemed to bloom and shift in the light, immediately seeking me out across the crowded hall. The banquet hall had gone almost completely silent, hundreds of pairs of eyes tracking the uninvited guests who had just violated every rule of diplomatic etiquette. Conversations died mid-sentence, wine glasses hung suspended in the air, and even the servants had stopped moving. I felt Serafina's grip on my arm shift slightly, her diplomatic composure intact but her tension evident to me. "Jean," she murmured quietly, recognition clear in her voice. After 3 years as classmates at Mythos Academy, she knew him well. Rachel's reaction was more immediate. "Callie?" she whispered, surprise coloring her tone. The senior student who had been their upperclassman at Mythos was the last person she'd expected to see crashing an Eastern diplomatic banquet. And then, as if choreographed, all 4 of them turned to look directly at me. The collective stare hit me with the weight of inevitability. Jin's dark eyes held their usual cool assessment, though I caught what might have been the faintest hint of satisfaction at having created such a scene. Callie's smirk widened into something approaching a grin, clearly delighted by the chaos she'd helped orchestrate. Elias maintained his professional composure, but there was definitely a "we need to talk" quality to his gaze. "And Reika?" Reika smiled with the kind of quiet joy that suggested she'd found exactly what she'd been looking for, those violet patterns in her eyes seeming to shimmer with genuine happiness. "Oh no," I thought, feeling Serafina's hand tighten slightly on my arm and sensing Rachel's sudden understanding of exactly what was happening. "They're here for me." The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity but was probably only a few seconds. Then Callie, because of course it would be Callie, broke the spell by speaking loudly enough for half the hall to hear. Well, Arthur," she called out, her voice carrying the familiar tone of mock exasperation. "Fancy seeing you here. And looking so formal too. I barely recognized you without dirt and monster blood all over your clothes." The comments sent a ripple of confused murmurs through the crowd. Nobles began whispering to each other, trying to process this apparent breach of protocol and figure out who exactly these people were and why they seemed to know me. I heard Serafina's sharp intake of breath as the pieces clicked into place for her. Jean stepped forward with measured grace, inclining his head in the barest suggestion of a bow toward the assembled nobility. When he spoke, his voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Prince Jean Ashbluff of the Western Continent," he announced formally, though his eyes never left mine. "We apologize for the unconventional entrance." That sent another wave of whispers through the crowd. A Western prince crashing an Eastern banquet was definitely not on tonight's expected agenda. But I caught the way some of the nobles glanced towards Serafina and Rachel with new understanding. If Jean was here, and they clearly knew him. Elias, ever the diplomat, smoothly produced what looked like official documents from his portfolio. "We have proper credentials for travel within Eastern territory," he said to the room at large, though his words were clearly directed toward any officials who might be considering having them forcibly removed. Our arrival was somewhat ahead of schedule. I could feel the weight of expectation settling on my shoulders like a heavy cloak. Every eye in the banquet hall was now fixed on me, waiting to see how I would respond to this unprecedented situation. I was acutely aware of Serafina's presence beside me, her diplomatic training probably working overtime to assess the political implications. Rachel's other hand had found my arm, her expression showing she understood exactly who these people were and what their presence meant. Across the room, I caught sight of Archduke Astoria watching the proceedings with interest rather than irritation. His violet eyes held a calculating gleam, as if he was filing away this information for future consideration. Taking a breath, I stepped forward, gently disengaging from Serafina and Rachel's steadying presence. The crowd parted slightly as I moved, creating a clear path between myself and the 4 unexpected arrivals. "Jean, Callie, Elias, Reika," I said, keeping my voice steady and projecting just enough to be heard by the immediate vicinity. "This is unexpected." Callie's grin widened, and I could practically hear her mental victory dance at successfully ambushing me. "Unexpected? Arthur, you've been missing for almost 3 months. Did you really think we wouldn't come looking for you eventually?" I felt my stomach drop as several more pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. 3 months. That's how long it had been since I'd last made contact with any of them. 3 months of war, of fighting vampires, of breakthrough revelations and near-death experiences. 3 months during which I'd apparently forgotten that I had other responsibilities, other people who might be concerned about my whereabouts. We sent messages, Elias added, his tone perfectly professional but with an underlying note that suggested those messages had gone unanswered. Multiple messages through various channels. When we received no response, we decided to come collect our wayward guild master in person, Reika finished softly, her voice carrying that gentle warmth that somehow made everything sound reasonable and caring rather than accusatory. The violet patterns in her eyes seemed to pulse with relief at finally seeing me safe. Guild master. The words hung in the air like a revelation, though for some in the crowd, particularly those who had attended Mythos, this wasn't entirely surprising news. Serafina and Rachel exchanged a quick glance, their expressions showing they'd been expecting this shoe to drop eventually. But for many of the nobles and dignitaries present, this was new information that required immediate recalculation of Arthur's political significance. Why exactly, I asked carefully, very aware of my audience, is Ouroboros here? The question was directed at my guild members, but it was really for the benefit of everyone listening. Whatever explanation they gave would become part of the official record, discussed in private meetings and diplomatic communications for weeks to come. Elias stepped forward slightly, his professional demeanor never wavering. Simply put, he said, his voice carrying the patient tone of someone explaining something that should have been obvious, we needed to meet with our guild master after nearly 3 months of absence. Certain administrative matters require your personal attention. It was a perfectly reasonable explanation that revealed absolutely nothing while suggesting that there were important matters at stake. Classic Elias. But as I looked at the 4 of them, Jean with his calculating composure, Callie with her challenging smirk, Elias with his professional competence, and Reika with her quiet, unwavering focus and those unique violet eyes that seemed to see only me, I realized that this wasn't just about administrative matters. Chapter 511, Warian Banquet 4. I glanced over at Arthur, who looked about as pleased as someone realizing their quiet evening had just been derailed. The sight of him unsettled, eyes flickering between us like he was calculating variables in an equation that suddenly had too many unknowns, sent an unexpected ache through my chest. I'd done this to him, burst into his carefully managed world and scattered his composure. Fine, he sighed at last, rubbing the bridge of his nose with the weariness of someone carrying invisible weights. Let's discuss this properly, since you came running in here. He turned courteously to Princess Rachel and Princess Serafina, who both responded with the practiced grace of nobility interrupted mid-conversation. Their gazes settled on me, measured, expectant, carrying an awareness that made my skin prickle with discomfort. The 5 of us moved to a quieter corner of the hall where shadows fell more kindly and the furniture spoke of serious conversations held in hushed tones. Why like this? Arthur asked, his voice steady but edged with fatigue. Why now? Because timing matters, Elias said, his usual lightness tempered by urgency. We're talking about investing in the Eastern continent while the opportunity exists. Arthur absorbed this with the careful neutrality of someone who'd learned to see traps before stepping into them. He gave a measured nod. We have the resources. Barely, Callie interjected dryly, her arms crossed as she fixed Arthur with a pointed stare. Thanks to someone's tendency to throw money at every sob story that crosses his desk. Arthur's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Strategic investments. Right? Like that strategic investment in the orphanage reconstruction project that somehow ballooned to 3 times the original budget. Callie's tone could have cut glass. Or the essential funding for that struggling merchant family that turned out to be. They needed help, Arthur said, his voice carrying a warning edge. They needed financial advisors, not a bailout from our guild funds. Callie leaned forward, her dark eyes glittering with challenge. But sure, let's add another continent to your charity list. What could go wrong? This is different, Arthur replied, his composure intact but rigid. This is business. Callie snorted. Everything's business with you until it involves someone with sad eyes and a tragic backstory. Exactly. Elias leaned forward, diplomatically steering the conversation before it could escalate further. We need to move while we can still shape the outcome. Loans, not aid, Arthur said, his eyes still locked with Callie's in silent battle. They won't accept charity? Not after everything they've endured. Finally, something sensible, Callie muttered, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. And in return, we secure dungeon rights. We integrate their recovery into our economic framework. Eastern resources, technology, cultural goods, we establish the foundation now, we control the market later. Arthur's expression sharpened. We're not operating under Ouroboros. Obviously not, Callie said with exaggerated patience. Even you're not naive enough to put us under their thumb. Though given your track record with partnerships. Callie, Arthur's voice carried a note of genuine warning now. What? I'm just saying, your definition of mutually beneficial tends to lean heavily toward beneficial for everyone except us. She shrugged, unrepentant. Someone has to keep track of these things since you're apparently allergic to profit margins. We planned for that, Jean interjected smoothly, producing his phone before the tension could thicken further. I registered an independent company in the East last month. Clean documentation, legitimate structure. We just need your authorization to proceed. Arthur studied the screen Jean showed him, his face revealing nothing as he processed the figures. Callie peered over his shoulder, her expression skeptical. These numbers assume everything goes perfectly, she observed. What's our contingency if the political situation destabilizes? If the dungeon yields are lower than projected? If you're quite finished cataloging every possible disaster, Arthur said coolly, the projections include reasonable buffer zones for variables. Reasonable according to who? Your optimism isn't a valid risk assessment tool, Arthur. Neither is your pessimism, Callie. They stared at each other for a moment, the air crackling with the kind of tension that came from years of similar disagreements. I found myself holding my breath, watching Arthur's jaw work as he maintained his composure against Callie's relentless pragmatism. Understood, Arthur said finally, his voice controlled. Though a message would have been sufficient for this. Something twisted in my stomach at his words, a strange disappointment I couldn't name. Elias glanced my way with knowing eyes. She needed to see you herself. When she heard you were actually going to the front lines, she was ready to march east with just her sword. Heat flooded my face, fierce and sudden. I stared at the floor, willing the burning in my cheeks to subside. Oh, how touching, Callie said, though her tone had lost some of its earlier bite. Nothing says strategic planning like charging into a war zone because someone's worried about there. Callie, Arthur cut her off, his voice gentler but firm. I forced myself to look up, the words spilling out before I could stop them. I need to fight for you. The silence that followed stretched like a held breath. Something in that quiet space felt fragile, important in ways I couldn't articulate. My chest felt tight, full of emotions I had no names for, only the certainty that Arthur mattered more than anything else in my world, that his safety was worth any risk, any sacrifice. Well, Callie said after a moment, her voice softer than I'd heard it all evening, at least someone around here has their priorities straight. Thank you, Reka, Arthur said, his voice carrying genuine warmth now. I lifted my eyes to meet his. His smile was warm, genuine, the kind that made something deep in my chest flutter and ache simultaneously. It was the smile I'd been chasing without realizing it, the one that made every sleepless night of training, every moment of doubt, every fear worth bearing. I found myself smiling back helplessly like a flower turning towards sunlight. Your timing is actually perfect, he continued. We need to begin preparations for next year regardless. Assuming we survive Callie's risk assessments, he added with the ghost of a smirk. Assuming you don't bankrupt us with your compassion first, she shot back, but there was no real heat in it now. His fingers moved to the silver ring on his hand, a spatial storage device I'd seen him use countless times. Light shimmered briefly as he withdrew a thin card of dark gold bordered in obsidian. An 8-star adventurer license. The others went very still. Even Callie's perpetual skepticism gave way to surprised respect. The weight of what he held seemed to change the air itself. But I felt no surprise, only a warm sense of rightness. Of course Arthur had achieved this. He always found ways to reach places others couldn't even imagine. With this, he said, regarding the license thoughtfully, we can register as a gold-grade guild. Finally, Callie breathed, and for once her voice held unguarded admiration. Do you have any idea how long I've been waiting for this moment? The bureaucratic advantages alone. Arthur actually smiled at her enthusiasm. But not immediately. First, we'll consolidate our position in the east. Build our strength. Then we advance. Smart, Callie nodded approvingly. Though I'm shocked you're actually thinking strategically instead of just diving in headfirst. His expression grew more serious. I'll need to negotiate with the Emperor as well. The restrictions on Slatemark-registered guilds operating beyond the Empire's borders, there has to be a way around them. Good luck with that, Callie said dryly. Imperial bureaucracy makes dungeon politics look straightforward. I nodded without hesitation, my faith in Arthur absolute. If anyone could bend imperial law through sheer force of will and careful negotiation, it was him. He carried heavier burdens before. He turned to me again, his hand moving to the spatial ring once more. Another shimmer of light, and he held a leather-bound book, worn but well cared for, heavy with significance. I have something for you. He extended it toward me. My fingers trembled slightly as I reached out to accept it. You're using a grade 5 sword art from the academy, correct? He asked. I nodded. The top students in each year received suitable techniques of that grade. Arthur's voice dropped, taking on a weight that made my breath catch. This is grade 6. More than that, it belonged to my master. The Martial King's sword art. The world seemed to stop. Everyone knew that name now. The man who had slain the vampire monarch. The second human in history to reach high radiant rank, a living symbol of humanity's refusal to surrender to extinction. The legend who had shaped Arthur into who he was today. And he was gone now. But his legacy lived on. It was here, in my hands. Even Callie had gone silent, her usual commentary absent in the face of such a profound gift. Thank you, I whispered, clutching the book against my chest. The leather was warm, as if it still held traces of the great man who had once wielded these techniques. For trusting me with this. I looked directly into Arthur's eyes, letting him see the depth of my conviction. I swear I'll master every technique, honor every lesson. I'll carry this responsibility with everything I am. I will never disappoint you. The words came from somewhere deeper than conscious thought, carrying with them emotions I couldn't fully understand, a devotion that felt like gravity pulling every part of me toward him. There was something profound stirring in my chest, something that made his approval feel like sunlight and his trust like the most precious gift in the world. I would prove that Arthur's belief in me was never misplaced. Whatever this feeling was that made my heart race when he smiled, that made his safety more important than my own life, I would let it guide me to become worthy of the gift he'd given me. Chapter 5:12, Warian Banquet 5. We returned to the banquet hall together, the warm glow of chandeliers washing over us as the sounds of conversation and music filled the air once more. The Martial King's sword art was safely tucked away in my spatial ring, but I could still feel its weight, not physical, but something deeper. A responsibility. A promise. Arthur moved with his usual composed grace as we rejoined the crowd, but I noticed the way Princess Rachel's eyes found his immediately, a soft smile playing at her lips. Princess Seraphina, standing near the orchestra, turned as well, her elegant posture straightening as she caught sight of him. I knew what would happen next. I'd seen it before at other formal gatherings, the expected protocols, the political necessities wrapped in social grace. Arthur would dance with both of them. It was part of his role, part of the delicate balance he maintained in this world of nobility and power. And I was genuinely happy for him. Rachel and Seraphina were both remarkable women, intelligent, kind, beautiful in ways that seemed effortless. They understood Arthur's world in ways I was still learning. They could stand beside him as equals in the complex dance of politics and diplomacy. So why did something twist uncomfortably in my chest when Rachel approached him with that radiant smile? Arthur, she said, extending her hand with practiced elegance. I believe you owe me a dance from our interrupted conversation. Of course, Your Highness. Arthur's bow was perfect, his smile warm and genuine as he took her hand. It would be my honor. I watched them move onto the dance floor, Arthur's hand settling at Rachel's waist with comfortable familiarity. They moved together beautifully, her golden hair catching the light as she laughed at something he murmured, his steps confident and sure as he guided her through the waltz. They looked right together. Natural. Like pieces of a puzzle that had found their proper places. I should have felt nothing but happiness watching them. Arthur deserved joy, deserved someone who could match his brilliance and share his burdens. Rachel clearly cared for him deeply, I could see it in the way her eyes never left his face, in the soft contentment of her expression. But there was something else stirring beneath my genuine gladness for them. Something small and sharp that I immediately crushed down, horrified at myself for even feeling it. What right did I have to feel, whatever this was? Arthur had given me everything, his trust, his training, his master's legacy. The last thing he needed was his sword harboring inappropriate feelings. They look good together, Callie observed quietly beside me, her usual sarcasm replaced by something gentler. They do, I agreed, and meant it. The strange tightness in my throat had nothing to do with my words. When the song ended, Arthur escorted Rachel back toward us with courteous attention. But before he could settle, Seraphina appeared at his elbow, her silver hair swept up in an intricate style that somehow made her look both regal and approachable. My turn, I believe, she said with a smile that transformed her usually serious features. Unless you're too tired from all that strategic planning? Arthur chuckled, offering her his arm. Never too tired for you, Sarah. The casual nickname sent another unwelcome pang through me. I watched them take the floor for a different dance, something more complex, requiring closer coordination. Seraphina moved with the fluid grace of someone trained from childhood in courtly arts, her steps perfectly matched to Arthur's. Where Rachel brought out Arthur's warmth, Seraphina seemed to sharpen his focus. They spoke in low voices as they danced, her head tilted toward his ear, his expression thoughtful as he listened. I found myself studying the way Arthur's hand rested against Seraphina's back, the comfortable distance between them that spoke of trust and familiarity. The rational part of my mind catalogued all the reasons they were perfect together. The irrational part whispered traitor thoughts I refused to acknowledge. You know, Callie's voice cut through my brooding, you've been staring at them for 5 minutes straight. Someone might get the wrong idea. I jerked my attention back to her, heat flooding my cheeks. I was just... Relax. I'm not judging. Callie's expression was unreadable. But you know what you should be doing instead of standing here like a statue? Before I could ask what she meant, the music shifted to something slower, more intimate. Arthur and Seraphina's dance came to a natural end and I watched him bow to her with the same courteous attention he'd shown Rachel. Go, Callie said, her voice carrying an odd note of command. Dance with him. My stomach dropped. What? No, I couldn't, I'm not. You're what? Not good enough. Callie's eyebrow arched dangerously. Not worthy of a simple dance? It's not that, it's just, I fumbled for words, panic rising in my throat. He's with them and I'm just his guild member? Someone who just swore to fight for him. Callie's voice cut through my protests. Someone he trusts enough to give his master's sword art? She stepped closer, her dark eyes intense. You think he'd object to one dance with you? I wanted to argue, but the words died in my throat. Because the truth was, I desperately wanted to dance with Arthur. I'd been practicing in secret for months, stolen moments in empty training rooms, moving through steps I'd memorized from watching other couples, imagining what it might feel like to move with him like that. I started, then stopped, my resolve crumbling under the weight of my own longing. That's what I thought. Callie's expression softened slightly. Go. Before someone else asks him. My feet moved without conscious decision, carrying me across the polished floor toward where Arthur stood speaking quietly with Jean. My heart hammered against my ribs, each step feeling simultaneously too fast and too slow. Arthur? My voice came out smaller than I'd intended. He turned and his smile when he saw me was immediate and genuine. Reka, are you enjoying the banquet? I swallowed hard, my carefully rehearsed words scattering like leaves. Would you like to dance? With me? Something shifted in his expression, surprise, perhaps followed by something warmer. I'd be honored. He offered me his hand and I took it with fingers that trembled only slightly. His palm was warm against mine, steady and sure as he guided me onto the dance floor. I should warn you, I said as we took position, I'm not very good at this. Arthur's other hand settled at my waist, proper and respectful, but the contact still sent warmth spreading through me. I doubt that. You approach everything with such dedication, I'm sure you've practiced. He wasn't wrong. I'd spent countless hours working through the steps, determined that if this moment ever came, I wouldn't embarrass myself. But knowing the movements and actually performing them with Arthur were entirely different things. The music began and we moved together. My initial stiffness melted away as Arthur's lead guided me through the familiar patterns. He was patient when I hesitated, encouraging when I found my rhythm. See? He said softly, his voice meant only for me. You're doing perfectly. I looked up into his face, struck by how different this felt from watching him dance with Rachel and Serafina. There was no political undercurrent here, no strategic planning disguised as social interaction. Just us. Just this moment. You've been practicing, he observed, approval warm in his voice. When? Late evenings. In the training hall. I felt my cheeks warm. I wanted to be ready. In case. In case of what? The honest answer lodged in my throat. In case you ever looked at me the way you look at them. In case you ever wanted to dance with me. In case I could be worthy of a moment like this. In case it was needed, I said instead. For formal events. Guild business. Arthur's smile suggested he saw through my diplomatic answer, but he didn't press. Instead, he guided me through a gentle turn, his movements perfectly calculated to make me look graceful. As we moved together, I found myself drowning in details I'd never noticed before. The way his eyes crinkled slightly when he smiled. The subtle scent of his cologne. The careful strength in his hands as he led me through steps that felt like floating. This was what I'd been missing, watching him with the princesses. Not the politics or the strategy, but the simple intimacy of shared movement. The way he focused entirely on his partner, making them feel like the only person in the room. Thank you, I said suddenly, the words spilling out. For everything. The sword art, your trust, this dance. All of it. Arthur's expression grew serious, though he never missed a step. Thank you for caring enough to burst into a banquet just to make sure I'm safe. Something in his tone made my breath catch. There was understanding there, recognition of something I couldn't even name myself. I'll always worry about you, I admitted, the truth slipping out before I could stop it. I can't help it. I know. His voice was gentle, accepting. And I'm grateful for it, even when I wish you wouldn't risk yourself for my sake. The song was winding down, our steps slowing to match the music's natural conclusion. I felt a sharp pang of loss as the moment prepared to end, this perfect bubble of time where nothing existed but Arthur's hands guiding me, his voice meant only for my ears. Reika, he said as we came to a stop, his hands lingering a moment longer than strictly necessary. Whatever path you choose to walk, I want you to know I believe in you. Completely. The words hit me like a physical force, stealing my breath and making my eyes sting with sudden emotion. This was what I'd been chasing without understanding it, not just his approval or his trust, but this absolute faith that felt like being seen, truly seen, for exactly who I was. I won't let you down, I whispered, meaning it with every fiber of my being. You never could, he replied simply, and somehow I knew he meant that too. As he escorted me back to the edge of the dance floor, I caught sight of Callie watching us with an expression I couldn't quite read. Rachel and Serafina had moved on to conversation with other guests, their easy confidence a reminder of the worlds they moved in so naturally. But for these few minutes I'd had something that was mine alone. A dance, a conversation, a moment of Arthur's complete attention that hadn't been about duty or politics or anything beyond the simple fact that I'd asked and he'd said yes. Even if the memory of dancing in his arms would replay in my mind for weeks to come. Chapter 5:13, Warian Banquet 6. I guided Ciola across the floor with the practiced grace of nobility bred into my bones. My movements were fluid, refined, each step placed with the confidence of someone who had waltzed through state banquets long before I ever learned to channel divine light through a blade. Her hand rested in mine like a whispered promise, fingers cool but unwavering. She never resisted my lead, never stumbled or hesitated. Ciola possessed a natural elegance that seemed effortless, as if grace was simply her default state of being. Like moonlight finding its way through the smallest gaps in fortress walls, inevitable, beautiful, illuminating everything it touched. You haven't looked at me once since we started dancing, she observed, her voice carrying that particular softness she reserved for moments when the world felt too heavy. I didn't think I needed to, I replied, though my gaze remained fixed somewhere beyond her shoulder. You always match my pace perfectly. Her golden eyes lifted to meet mine, and I felt that familiar jolt of recognition, the same one that had struck me the first time I'd seen her in the Eastern Territories, standing among the ruins of what had once been her home. Still, it's considered polite to acknowledge your partner. I was thinking, I said, finally allowing myself to meet her gaze fully. About Arthur, she guessed without hesitation. The accuracy of her observation shouldn't have surprised me. Ciola had always possessed an uncanny ability to read the currents beneath still waters. I hesitated for the span of a heartbeat, then nodded. She looked away, watching the chandelier light dance across the polished marble floor like scattered stars. He's always at the center of things, she said thoughtfully. Like gravity itself. Even when he tries not to be, people just gravitate toward him. Some of us orbit at different distances, I murmured, the metaphor feeling more apt than I'd intended. Closer or farther, but always circling back. Ciela didn't smile, but something gentle settled in her silence, an understanding that ran deeper than words. It was the kind of quiet that existed between two people who had long since stopped pretending they were strangers to each other's thoughts. I didn't come to this banquet for the politics, I admitted, the words emerging with more honesty than I'd planned. I came because I knew you'd be here. She blinked once, slowly, as if processing something fragile. You always know exactly what to say. And I rarely have the courage to say it, I replied, guiding her through a gentle turn that brought us closer together. Her grip on my hand tightened, not pulling but anchoring, as if she were afraid one of us might drift away. Her other hand found my shoulder, fingertips lingering against the silk of my formal jacket as though deciding whether it was safe to settle there. We moved through another sequence, the music swelling around us like an embrace. Other couples danced nearby, their conversations and laughter creating a gentle backdrop to our more intimate exchange. But they felt distant, as if Ciela and I existed in our own pocket of space and time. You could have stayed in the north, she continued. Stayed in your comfortable life in the land your family ruled. But you came here. There were things worth coming for, I said, my voice lower now, meant only for her ears. Something shifted in her expression, surprise, perhaps, or recognition of a truth we'd both been dancing around for months. Her lips parted as if she might speak, but the music began its final crescendo, demanding our attention for the last few measures. I guided her through the closing steps with deliberate care, each movement designed to extend these precious moments for as long as possible. As the final note hung in the air like incense, neither of us moved to separate. Her hand remained in mine, warm now despite the coolness of her touch when we'd begun. Lucifer, she whispered, my name carrying more weight than it ever had before. I know, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure what I was acknowledging. The feelings that had been building between us like storm clouds? The impossibility of our situation? The way she made me want to be worthy of the faith she placed in me? In that suspended moment, with her golden eyes reflecting the chandelier's light and her hand still clasped in mine, I realized something both simple and terrifying. I didn't want to let go. Not of her hand, not of this moment, not of the possibility that someone like her might actually care for someone like me. But then movement caught my peripheral vision and I turned to see Arthur leading Reika onto the dance floor. The sight shouldn't have surprised me. Arthur was nothing if not gracious, and Reika was a valued member of his guild. What did surprise me was the expression on her face. Hopeful. Like she was holding something precious and fragile in her chest. The way she gazed up at Arthur as they moved together, it was the same expression I'd seen on Rachel's face, on Seraphina's face, on Rose's face, and on Cecilia's face. The same soft, unconscious adoration that spoke of feelings deeper than mere respect or friendship. A chill ran down my spine as understanding crashed over me like a wave. Oh no, I breathed, the words escaping before I could stop them. What is it? Ciela followed my gaze, her own eyes widening as she took in the scene playing out before us. Arthur was speaking to Reika in low tones, his expression gentle and encouraging. She hung on every word, her usual composed mask completely abandoned in favor of something raw and honest. The way she moved with him, the way she seemed to glow under his attention, it was painfully obvious to anyone who knew how to look. That's 5, I muttered, running calculations in my head that I really didn't want to be making. Rachel, Seraphina, Rose, Cecilia. I watched Reika's face light up at something Arthur said. And now Reika. The shiver that ran through me had nothing to do with the temperature in the banquet hall. Arthur had always been charismatic, had always drawn people to him like moths to flame. But this was getting ridiculous. How was it possible for one person to inspire that kind of devotion in so many remarkable women? He can't possibly. I started, then stopped myself. Because knowing Arthur, he probably could. And would. With his typical oblivious nobility, he'd somehow managed to make all of them feel valued and cherished without even realizing the emotional chaos he was creating. I rubbed the back of my head, suddenly feeling foolish. A rueful chuckle escaped me as I realized how that must have sounded. Well, I'm already managing 2 complicated situations myself, so I suppose I don't have much room to judge. The admission hung between us, honest and slightly embarrassed. Because it was true, I'd fallen for both Dia and Ciela in different ways at different times, and I was still trying to figure out how to navigate those feelings without hurting anyone. 2. Ciela's voice was carefully neutral, but I caught the hint of something else beneath it. Not jealousy exactly, but awareness. Dia and... I met her gaze, letting the silence finish the sentence for me. Her golden eyes searched my face for a long moment, and I forced myself not to look away. Whatever happened next, she deserved honesty. After everything we'd been through together, after all the careful distances we'd maintained, she deserved to know where she stood. And? She prompted softly. And you, I said simply. It's always been you, Ciela. From the moment I saw you standing in those ruins, refusing to let the world break you. You made me want to be better than I was. Her breath caught, barely audible above the music and conversation surrounding us. Lucifer. I know it's complicated, I continued, the words coming easier now that I'd started. I know I have no right to ask for anything from you. but I can't pretend anymore that what I feel for you is simple friendship or alliance. Ciela was quiet for a long moment, her gaze dropping to where our hands were still joined. When she looked up again, her eyes held a complexity of emotions I couldn't fully read. What about Dia? She asked quietly. What about her? I replied, though I knew it wasn't a fair response. My feelings for her don't diminish what I feel for you. They're different, but both real. It was a terrible answer, inadequate and probably selfish. But it was the truth, and Ciela had always valued honesty over pretty lies. She studied my face for another long moment, then surprised me by stepping closer. You're right, she said softly. It is complicated. Does that mean? I started, hardly daring to hope. It means, she said, reaching up to adjust my collar with fingers that trembled slightly, that I'd rather navigate complicated with you than simple with anyone else. Chapter 5:14, Warian Banquet 7. The banquet settled into its familiar rhythm after my dance with Reika, the ebb and flow of conversation and music creating a backdrop of refined civilization. Yet I found my attention drawn repeatedly to her, standing near a cluster of academy students who had approached her with the eager curiosity of youth recognizing greatness in their midst. Reika looked as though her heart might burst from sheer joy. The smile that graced her features wasn't the practiced expression of nobility or the careful mask of diplomacy, it was pure, unguarded happiness. She didn't know how to manufacture false emotions. That sort of radiant contentment could only come from someone who had never dared hope to be truly seen, but now found herself bathed in light as if the sun itself had chosen to shine for her alone. The transformation was remarkable. Where once she had moved through the world like a shadow, now she carried herself with quiet confidence. Not arrogance, Reika would never possess that particular flaw, but the self-assurance that came from understanding one's place and purpose. My gaze shifted across the ballroom, cataloging the various dramas playing out in plain sight. Jean and Callie were locked in what could generously be called a waltz, though the tension crackling between them suggested it was more akin to a duel conducted through dance steps. Their movements were too sharp, too precise, each turn and dip carrying the weight of unspoken arguments and stubborn pride. Callie's face held that particular expression she wore when she was simultaneously annoyed and impressed, a combination that seemed to be Jin's specialty in provoking. For his part, Jean moved with his usual fluid grace, but there was something deliberately provocative in the way he guided her through the more challenging sequences, as if he was testing her limits just to see how she'd respond. Meanwhile, Elias stood at the periphery like a patient sentinel, crystal glass in hand, observing the proceedings with the weary amusement of a teacher watching in classroom full of brilliant but chaotic students. The exhaustion he carried was subtle but unmistakable to those who knew him well, the burden of being the steady hand that kept our group grounded when ambition and passion threatened to pull us in too many directions. Rachel and Serafina had gracefully rejoined their respective diplomatic circles, their earlier dances with me already transformed into political capital through carefully orchestrated conversations. Both possessed the rare gift of making state business feel like intimate discourse, a skill that would serve the realm well in the challenging years ahead. Lucifer had found his way back to Ciola's side, and even from a distance I could see the subtle shift in their dynamic. Whatever conversation had passed between them during their dance had clearly resolved something that had been building for months. There was a new ease in their proximity, a quiet understanding that spoke of barriers finally lowered. But my attention inevitably returned to Reika. As if sensing my gaze, her eyes found mine across the crowded room and held. This was the direct regard of someone who had found her footing in the world and was no longer afraid to meet it head-on. In the warm light of the chandeliers, I noticed again how much the awakening of her gift had changed her. Her eyes caught the illumination with an otherworldly quality, not metaphorically but literally. Where once they had been a simple dark brown, they now held patterns like flower petals within each iris, delicate and intricate as if nature itself had decided to craft something beautiful from the raw material of magic. It was a side effect of awakening the cursed script, her unique gift that had rewritten portions of her very being. The transformation went deeper than the physical, though that was the most immediately visible change. Her mana capacity had stabilized at low ascendant rank, a breakthrough that most adventurers spent decades pursuing, if they achieved it at all. The gift itself had evolved beyond its original crude mechanism of forcing mana rank advancement through sheer will and determination. Now it refined her existing power, tuning her magical resonance like a master craftsman adjusting the tension in a violin string. The instability that had once threatened to tear her apart from within had given way to a controlled enhancement that amplified her natural talents without overwhelming her foundation. And I had given her my master sword art. The decision still felt right, even knowing the magnitude of what I'd entrusted to her care. Magnus Drakar's techniques were more than just combat forms, they were the crystallized essence of a legend who had walked into the pages of history by ending the vampire monarch's reign of terror. Master had achieved what many thought impossible, becoming only the second human ever to reach high radiant rank, though the effort had cost him his life mere moments after his greatest triumph. Some might wonder why I hadn't learned the techniques myself, why I would give away such a precious inheritance rather than add it to my own arsenal. The answer was both simple and profound. Master had never intended them for me. If he had, the scrolls would have been placed in my hands years ago during the countless hours we spent training together. He had told me once, during one of our quieter moments between sparring sessions, that his path had been carved from rage, loss, and desperation, emotions that had no place in my development. It wasn't a criticism of either approach, merely an acknowledgement that different warriors require different tools. I was meant to forge my own techniques, to develop a style that fit me as perfectly as a blade shaped specifically for its wielder's hand. Master's way had been born from pain, and the need for vengeance mine would need to spring from different soil entirely. But Reika, she would wield those techniques exactly as they had been written. Not because she lacked the creativity or skill to adapt them, but because she possessed something rarer than raw talent, the devotion to master a legacy without feeling the need to improve upon it. No shortcuts, no modifications, no attempts to make the art easier or more convenient. That kind of respect for tradition, combined with the determination to honor it through perfect execution, was something I admired more than I had ever expressed aloud. The thought prompted me to action. I made my way across the ballroom, navigating through clusters of conversation and the occasional dancing couple until I reached the group surrounding Reika. The academy students showed appropriate deference as I approached, though I noticed how they looked at her with newfound respect. Word of her advancement had clearly spread, as such news always did in our small community. "Reika," I said, and she turned to me immediately, that same radiant smile still gracing her features. "A word." She nodded and politely excused herself from the group, following me to a quieter alcove where we could speak without being overheard. The space was decorated with elegant tapestries depicting the empire's history, their rich colors muted in the softer lighting. "I'm proud of you," I said, the words carrying more weight than I had initially intended. Her eyes widened with surprise, and I found myself looking away, suddenly conscious of the intensity of her gaze and the emotions it might reveal. There was something about the direct honesty of her attention that made maintaining eye contact feel almost too intimate for the public setting. "I will never regret the choice I made to save you, Reika," I continued, forcing myself to meet her gaze again. "Because you have proven yourself worthy in every conceivable way. You've worked harder than I could have asked for, shown dedication that goes beyond duty or obligation." She stood perfectly still, absorbing my words with the same focused intensity she brought to mastering new techniques. I could see the emotion building behind her transformed eyes, the way she was holding her breath as if afraid that speaking might shatter this moment. "All I ask of you now is that you continue as you have," I said, my voice carrying the formal weight of a vow. "Stand by my side as I pursue the heights of power, and let me know that when I reach my peak, I'll have someone beside me who understands the cost of that climb." The silence that followed felt profound, weighted with significance that went beyond the simple exchange of words. I watched her lips part as if she might speak, then close again as she seemed to search for a response worthy of what had passed between us. Finally, she moved with fluid grace into a formal bow, one hand placed over her heart in the traditional gesture of fealty. When she raised her head, her eyes held a depth of emotion that spoke to something far deeper than mere loyalty or gratitude. "It would be my honor to be your sword," she said, her voice steady despite the intensity of feeling behind it. "Your shield, your support, whatever you need me to be. I swear to you that I will never falter, never waver, never give you cause to doubt the faith you've placed in me." "Thank you, Reika," I said simply, knowing that any attempt to match her eloquence would only diminish the moment. "That means more to me than you know." Chapter 5:15, Warian Banquet 8. "It would be my honor to be your sword." The words echoed in my mind as Arthur and I returned to the main floor of the banquet hall, but they felt inadequate compared to the storm of emotions churning in my chest. Every step felt weightless, as if I might float away on the sheer joy threatening to overflow from within me. "I'm proud of you. I will never regret saving you. You are worth it in every way." His words replayed themselves on an endless loop, each repetition sending fresh waves of warmth through my entire being. I pressed my lips together, fighting to maintain the composed expression expected of someone who had just received such an honor, but I could feel the smile trying to break free. My cheeks ached from the effort of restraining it. I focused on my breathing, on the familiar weight of my sword at my side, on anything that might help me regain control. But every time I thought I had managed it, Arthur's voice would echo again in my memory, and the giddiness would surge back with renewed force. "Stand by my side when I reach peak." He wanted me there. Not just as a guild member, but as someone worthy of standing beside him at the summit of power. The thought made my heart race so fast I was genuinely concerned it might be audible to everyone around me. Well, came a familiar voice dripping with amusement. "Someone looks like they've just been told they won the lottery." I turned to find Elias approaching with that knowing smirk that meant trouble. His eyes held the particular gleam they got when he'd spotted something entertaining, and I realized with dawning horror that my carefully maintained composure might not be as effective as I'd hoped. "I don't know what you mean," I said, aiming for casual indifference and missing by several leagues. "Really?" Elias's grin widened. "Because you're practically glowing. Did Arthur give you another present? Maybe tell you how special you are?" Heat flooded my face so fast I felt dizzy. "It wasn't like that," I protested, which only seemed to confirm his suspicions. "Oh, it absolutely was like that." Elias moved closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "You know, I've seen that exact expression before. Usually on people who've just been personally blessed by their deity of choice." "Stop it," I hissed, glancing around nervously to make sure no one else was listening. The last thing I needed was for Arthur to overhear this conversation. "Stop what? Observing the obvious?" Elias chuckled, clearly enjoying my discomfort. "Reika, you look like someone just handed you the sun and moon wrapped in a bow. It's actually kind of adorable." "I do not," I started to deny it, but Callie's voice cut through my protest. "Oh, this is rich." She materialized beside us with the predatory grace of someone who had sensed weakness and moved in for the kill. What's got our little flower all flustered? I shot her a warning look, but she ignored it completely, her dark eyes dancing with mischief. Arthur complimented her, Elias supplied helpfully. She's been walking on air ever since. I have not, I said through gritted teeth, though even I could hear how unconvincing it sounded. Callie studied my face with the intensity of a scholar examining an interesting specimen. Dilated pupils, flushed cheeks, that particular starry-eyed expression. She tapped her chin thoughtfully. Classic symptoms of Arthur-induced euphoria. That's not a real condition, I snapped, which only made both of them laugh. Isn't it? Callie raised an eyebrow. Because I'm pretty sure half the female population of the Empire would disagree with you. Including you? The words slipped out before I could stop them, and I immediately regretted the defensive bite in my tone. Callie's expression shifted, becoming more serious but not unkind. Touché. Though I like to think I manage it better than most. Manage what? I demanded, frustrated by the implication that whatever I was feeling was so obvious it needed managing. The hopeless devotion, Elias said matter-of-factly. Though in your case, I'd say it's progressed well beyond devotion into something else entirely. My stomach dropped. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you don't. Callie's tone was gentle now, which somehow made it worse than when she'd been teasing. Just like you don't know why you spent months secretly practicing ballroom dancing or why you nearly charged across a continent when you heard he was going to the front lines. Those are completely normal reactions for someone desperately in love with their master? Elias finished helpfully. The words hit me like a physical blow. I opened my mouth to deny it, to explain that what I felt was loyalty and gratitude and admiration, nothing more. But the protest died in my throat because somewhere deep down, a part of me recognized the truth in what they were saying. I'm not, I started, then stopped, the words feeling false even as I tried to form them. Oh honey, Callie said, and her voice held genuine sympathy now. You really don't see it, do you? See what? I whispered, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. The way you look at him. The way you light up when he pays attention to you. The way you'd probably walk into hell itself if he asked you to. Callie's expression was uncharacteristically gentle. That's not just devotion, Reika. That's love. The word hung in the air between us like a challenge. I wanted to reject it, to laugh it off as ridiculous, but my traitorous heart had started beating faster at just hearing it spoken aloud. That's... I swallowed hard, struggling to find my voice. That's not possible. Why not? Elias asked, genuine curiosity replacing his earlier amusement. You're both remarkable people. It would hardly be surprising if feelings developed. Because he's... I gestured helplessly, trying to encompass everything that Arthur was: brilliant, powerful, destined for greatness beyond anything I could imagine. And I'm just... Just what? Callie's voice carried a note of challenge. Just someone he trusts enough to give his master's sword art? Just someone whose safety he worried about enough to send you away from danger? Just someone he chose to dance with tonight? Each point felt like another weight added to a scale I hadn't realized was tilting. When she put it like that, when she listed out Arthur's actions rather than just my feelings, it painted a picture I wasn't sure how to interpret. That doesn't mean anything, I said weakly. Doesn't it? Callie studied my face with that analytical intensity she usually reserved for combat tactics. Tell me, what did he say to you just now that has you glowing like a lantern? I hesitated, unwilling to share something so precious and personal. But Callie waited with infinite patience, and eventually the words tumbled out of their own accord. He said he was proud of me. That he'd never regret saving me because I was worth it. My voice dropped to barely above a whisper. He asked me to stand by his side when he reaches peak. Elias whistled low. It's not romantic, I protested, though the words felt hollow. Reika. Callie's voice was gentle but firm. When someone asks you to stand by their side at the summit of their power, that's not a casual request. That's choosing who you want with you at the most important moment of your life. The implications of her words crashed over me like a tide. I'd been so focused on the honor of being chosen, on the trust it represented, that I hadn't considered what it might mean from Arthur's perspective. Why he would want me there specifically when he could have anyone. But he's dating Princess Rachel, Princess Seraphina, Princess Cecilia, and Lady Rose, I said, grasping for the safety of established facts. He has relationships with people who actually make sense for someone like him. And that changes what you feel, how exactly? Callie asked with ruthless logic. It didn't. That was the terrifying truth I'd been avoiding. Whether Arthur was available or not, whether anything could ever come of these feelings or not, they existed. They were real. And pretending otherwise was becoming increasingly impossible. I need some air, I said suddenly, the weight of these revelations making the banquet hall feel suffocating. Actually, Jin's voice interrupted our conversation as he approached from across the room. We should probably start thinking about departure. The flight plan I filed has us leaving within the hour. I'd never been so grateful for a change of subject. The mention of Jin's private plane, the sleek, luxurious aircraft that had brought us here in comfort far beyond anything I'd experienced before, reminded me that this entire evening had been borrowed time. Soon we'd be back to the real world where I could process these confusing emotions in private. Perfect timing, Elias said with a meaningful glance at me. I think our little flower here could use some time to contemplate recent revelations. Chapter 5:16, Mothers 1. The year had limped to a close with more graves than graduations. Mythos Academy, once the fortress of the elite and the ambitious, had taken a blow that shook its foundations to the core. The third-year exchange program to Starcrest Academy in the East had been meant to broaden horizons, forge connections between institutions, and give promising students a taste of different educational philosophies. Instead, it had become a graveyard. When the war erupted across the eastern continent, the exchange students found themselves caught in the crossfire. Some had been killed outright in the initial attacks. Others had died fighting alongside local defenders, their bodies never recovered from battlefields that had been scorched by magic and steel. A few professors who had accompanied the program had perished trying to protect their charges. The losses were staggering. Entire families had been shattered. The Academy's board of directors, faced with grieving parents and a public outcry that reached the highest levels of government, made the only decision they could: immediate closure pending a full investigation. Diplomas were distributed based on our records up to the incident, a hollow gesture that felt more like an apology than an achievement. The rest was left to bureaucracy and time, twin healers that worked slowly but thoroughly. They said the Academy would reopen in September. They said it with conviction, as if speaking the words with enough authority could make them true. Whether I'd be attending again was another matter entirely. Not because I couldn't, my record was exemplary, my connection secure, but because I wasn't sure I should return to a place that would forever carry the weight of those empty chairs. So I returned home. Not in disgrace, not in triumph, just in the quiet, exhausted way that comes with surviving something too vast and terrible to fully comprehend. Serafina had taken the news of my departure with characteristic grace. Disappointed, certainly, I could see it in the slight tightening around her eyes, but she understood the necessity. She was always composed when it mattered, always capable of compartmentalizing her heart when duty called. She'd given me a kiss on the cheek, told me to return when I was ready, and hadn't looked back as I walked away. Rachel, on the other hand, had not been nearly so diplomatic about my decision to leave the East. She'd crossed the continent specifically to spend time with me, carved out a week from her royal obligations just for stolen moments together. And now I was abandoning her again, called back to family and responsibilities she couldn't share. We'd nearly fought, the kind of argument that builds like storm pressure until someone says something unforgivable. But I'd reminded her that her birthday was approaching, that I had plans to make it truly memorable. The mention of celebration had cracked her defenses like sunlight through clouds. She'd smiled, then giggled with the genuine delight that made her so captivating, then made me promise the event would be unforgettable. I'd agreed because I meant every word. And now here I was, gazing up at the impossible skyline of Avalon City. The capital of the Slatemark Empire was a testament to human ambition made manifest in steel and crystal. So vast it generated its own weather patterns, so wealthy that rumors claimed its underground transit systems were heated with molten gold, though that was likely just another urban legend in a city that thrived on them. The skyline stretched toward the heavens like a defiant gesture, towers of chrome and glass climbing ever higher, as if the city itself was determined to remind the gods who truly ruled this world. I summoned a self-driving cab with a gesture, watching as the sleek vehicle descended from the aerial traffic lanes. Its interior was a study in understated luxury, synthetic leather seats that felt better than the real thing, a dashboard that glowed with soft bioluminescence, and an AI voice calibrated to the perfect tone of professional calm. The journey through the roads was smooth and swift, past office towers that pierced the clouds and hanging gardens that defied gravity itself. The cab navigated the lanes with mechanical precision until it reached a gleaming spire of metal and marble that stretched toward the heavens like a modern Tower of Babel. Home. The Nightingale family penthouse occupied the entire 40th floor, naturally. We'd never been a family known for modesty or restraint. I approached the lobby's AI concierge, a holographic construct that materialized with a polite bow and scanned my biometric data with invisible sensors. "Welcome home, Master Arthur," it said in perfectly modulated tones. "Your family has been eagerly awaiting your return." The elevator rose with silent efficiency, carrying me skyward faster than falling in reverse. The doors opened with a soft chime that somehow conveyed both welcome and luxury. I stepped into the familiar hallway and knocked on the penthouse door, 3 sharp raps that echoed with the weight of homecoming. The response was immediate chaos, at least to my enhanced hearing. 2 sets of footsteps scrambled across marble floors. Something soft collided with something hard, possibly a throne cushion meeting a wall. A muffled shriek of surprise, followed by what sounded suspiciously like an argument about whose responsibility it was to answer the door. Luna's amused voice drifted through my consciousness. "Your family's more dramatic than a royal opera company." The door swung open to reveal 2 figures who shared my distinctive features: the raven black hair, the sharp azure eyes, the delicate bone structure that spoke of a bloodline carefully cultivated over generations. But where one radiated practiced elegance like a masterpiece of social conditioning, the other projected barely contained energy like a coiled spring. "Arthur?" My mother, Alice Nightingale, didn't wait for pleasantries or proper greetings. She pulled me into an embrace that could have toppled a lesser man, holding on with the desperate strength of someone who had spent too many sleepless nights wondering if her child was safe. "I'm back, Mom," I murmured against her shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of her perfume, something floral and expensive that had been a constant throughout my childhood. Behind her stood Arya, my sister, 16 years old and armed with an expression of carefully cultivated indifference. She crossed her arms and turned her head as if the sight of me was mildly irritating rather than the homecoming she'd clearly been anticipating. Her pout gave away the game entirely. Luna's voice carried a note of fond amusement. She took the express transport from Slaymark Academy just to beat you to the door. I smiled quietly at the observation, gently extricating myself from my mother's embrace. Arya huffed and glanced at me from the corner of her eye, clearly torn between maintaining her aloof facade and running over for her own hug. Arthur Nightingale, my mother said, her voice shifting into the tone that had struck fear into corporate executives and social climbers alike. Do you have any idea what you put us through? Coming home for barely a month, then disappearing to fight in a war like some common mercenary. The scolding hit with the precision of a master strategist who had clearly been preparing this speech for weeks. Her azure eyes blazed with the kind of maternal fury that could level mountains. I should ground you until you're 30, she continued, her voice rising with each word. Do you understand what it's like to watch the news every day, wondering if the next report will mention your name in the casualty lists? Your father aged 10 years in the span of weeks. The genuine anguish in her voice cut deeper than any blade. I could see the sleepless nights etched in the fine lines around her eyes, the worry that had carved new shadows across her elegant features. You're right, I said, the words coming easily because they were true. I'm sorry, Mom. I should have stayed. I should have thought about what my choices would do to you and Dad and Arya. She blinked, clearly not expecting such immediate capitulation. You agree? Completely. And I promise I'll stay home for the next several months. No wars, no distant campaigns, no running off to save the world. I managed a rueful smile. Just family time. Alice's expression softened, the maternal fury giving way to relief so profound it was almost painful to witness. Your father will be so glad to hear that. He's been beside himself with worry, had to cut his business trip short twice because he couldn't concentrate on anything but getting news from the East. When will he be back? I asked. Tomorrow evening. He'll probably cry when he sees you. She dabbed at her eyes with a silk handkerchief. We both will, probably. You scared us, Arthur. The warmth that spread through my chest at her words was something I'd never experienced in my previous life. A family that worried about me, that celebrated my return, that scolded me out of love rather than disappointment, it was a treasure beyond any magical artifact or legendary technique. In my past existence, I had been alone. Powerful, respected, feared, but ultimately isolated. Here, I had people who cared about my safety more than my achievements, who valued my presence more than my potential. I love you too, Mom, I said, meaning every syllable. Arya finally abandoned her pretense of indifference, crossing the room to wrap her arms around my waist. Don't ever do that again, she mumbled against my chest. Stupid brother. I won't, I promised, one hand settling on her dark hair. I'm home now. And for the first time in longer than I cared to remember, that word, home, carried the weight of truth. Chapter 517, Mothers 2. Cecilia, Adeline called softly as she rapped on the ornate door to her daughter's room. You haven't eaten in 3 days. Open the door. From within, Cecilia's voice drifted out, clipped and defiant. Will you send me to the East? Adeline sighed, already weary of the cyclical exchange. No. Then no, came the sharp reply, a verbal drawbridge lifted against any further intrusion. Adeline sighed. She had allowed Cecilia to go to the Tower of Magic to train so that her mind could be off that boy, and it worked. But she soon returned and began her protest at home by refusing to eat. And now Adeline had finally reached the end of her patience. Her finger hovered over the control panel of her smartwatch, overriding the lock with a sharp tap. The door slid open with an unceremonious hiss. Why are you coming in? Cecilia's glare could have scorched lesser opponents. She sat perched on her lavish king-sized bed, clutching a pillow tightly against her chest-like armor. Her red eyes burned with indignation as she stared at her mother. The room was every inch a royal sanctuary, plush carpets, an expansive TV mounted on the wall, a cozy living area, and a private bathroom worthy of an emperor's estate. Yet its occupant sat hunched in stubborn isolation as though the opulence around her had turned to ash. Adeline stepped inside, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. Because my daughter has refused to eat for 3 days over a boy, she said, exhaling heavily. Cecilia hugged the pillow tighter, her glare unrelenting. It's not just a boy, she muttered, her voice tinged with frustration. Adeline folded her arms, her expression softening, though irritation simmered just beneath the surface. She had been young once too, foolish and in love, with all the consuming, reckless passion that entailed. But watching her daughter waste away over someone, especially someone with 2 other princesses and a noble lady by his side, lit a fire of maternal protectiveness in her. Enough, Cecilia, she said firmly. You think I don't understand? I was a girl once too, you know. But letting yourself spiral like this won't change anything. Cecilia's glare wavered and she averted her gaze, biting her lip. You don't understand, she said, her voice trembling slightly. He's different. Adeline sighed again, softer this time. Different or not, he's not worth starving yourself over. Now come on. Eat something. You'll need your strength if you're going to keep fighting for him. Cecilia's fingers tightened around the pillow, and for a moment it seemed she might refuse again. But then grudgingly she nodded, her eyes still downcast. Adeline rested a gentle hand on Cecilia's shoulder, her voice soft yet purposeful. Good. And for what it's worth, you don't need to go to the East to see him. They're ending student conscription now, thanks to the reinforcements your father and I sent. Cecilia's eyes lit up, her usual steely demeanor melting into something almost childlike. Really? Adeline smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest at the rare sight of her daughter's unguarded excitement. I haven't seen that look in years, she thought, unable to suppress her own smile. Yes, really, Adeline continued. He'll likely return to Avalon soon. You'll? But her words trailed off as Cecilia had already snatched up her phone, her fingers flying across the screen with the kind of fervor reserved for only the most urgent of messages. Young love, Adeline mused, watching the scene with a mixture of nostalgia and amusement. Cecilia, so often Quinn's spitting image in temperament and reserve, was now a girl in the throes of affection, a side of her Adeline rarely glimpsed. It warmed her heart more than she cared to admit. However, as Adeline observed, Cecilia's radiant expression began to falter. Her brows furrowed, her lips pressed into a thin line, and a storm seemed to gather behind her pale blue eyes. Adeline tilted her head, curiosity piqued. Deciding discretion was the better part of parenting, she quietly masked her presence with a touch of manna and leaned closer to glimpse the source of Cecilia's distress. The phone screen displayed a flurry of images on social media. There was Serafina smiling radiantly, her arm hooked around Arthur's as they posed together. As Cecilia scrolled, more images appeared, this time Rachel, her expression warm, her proximity to Arthur even more intimate. Adeline straightened, concealing a wry smile. Ah, so that's what's stirring the pot. Cecilia continued scrolling, her frown deepening with each picture. Her grip on the phone tightened as though she could will the offending images to disappear through sheer force. For Adeline, men who courted many women simultaneously were, by principle, nothing short of trash. Most men at the top, whether emperors, archdukes, or kings, had only one wife. Not because they lacked opportunity, but because the exceptional women they married demanded undivided devotion. And yet, as Adeline considered Arthur Nightingale, she found herself amused. Trash, perhaps, but remarkable trash. Arthur had achieved something Adeline deemed borderline impossible. He had not only won Cecilia's guarded, possessive heart, but he had also managed to navigate relationships with Rachel, Serafina, and Rose, three equally strong-willed girls, without being torn apart by their rivalries. Quinn's daughter, agreeing to share? Adeline thought, shaking her head in amazement. He must be either exceptionally charming or an unparalleled fool. Perhaps both. Adeline's gaze lingered on Cecilia, who was still glaring at her phone as though its very existence was an affront. She shook her head, amused despite herself. This is one storm I'll let her weather alone for now. But just as she was about to leave, Cecilia turned her fiery crimson eyes toward her. Mother, Cecilia began, her tone layered with suggestion. For my birthday, I want to do that. Adeline blinked, tilting her head in confusion. That? She asked cautiously, her voice carefully neutral. Cecilia's expression didn't waver. I want him, she clarified, her eyes shining with a fierce intensity that made Adeline momentarily pause. Adeline raised a hand to her lips, blinking rapidly as she tried to process what she had just heard. Her daughter's bluntness was impressive, if nothing else. Well, Adeline thought, at least she's upfront about it. Better this than sneaking behind our backs. In the modern age, even for royals, youthful indiscretions were far from rare. Princes and princesses fooling around had become practically commonplace. Still, Adeline had to admit she preferred Cecilia's directness over clandestine trysts that could spark even more drama. But didn't you already? Adeline ventured, genuinely confused. She recalled a report from the guards stationed at the Nightingale residence during Cecilia's last visit. Cecilia shook her head firmly. No. Arthur wanted to wait. Adeline blinked again, this time in mild surprise. So the boy has a shred of decency after all, she thought. That unexpected bit of self-restraint nudged her opinion of Arthur ever so slightly upward. So what exactly are you asking of me? Adeline asked, though she already had a good idea. Cecilia's answer came without hesitation. Keep father from finding out, she said. Do something about your husband. Adeline's lips twitched, suppressing a smile. The audacity runs strong in this one. She exhaled softly, leaning back slightly as she regarded her daughter. This was going to be one of those conversations. Are you not worried I might act like your father and try to stop you? Adeline asked, her voice calm but laced with curiosity. Cecilia regarded her with a look that bordered on incredulous. Why would you? You were young once, you understand how I feel. You're not stupid. Adeline raised an eyebrow at the bluntness but said nothing. Her daughter's confidence was as admirable as it was alarming. Still, she couldn't deny Cecilia's point. There was a deep truth in her words, even if they were delivered with a touch too much brazenness. Fair enough, Adeline replied with a nod, though a flicker of disapproval crossed her mind at Cecilia's tone toward her father. She had learned not to intervene in that particular dynamic unless absolutely necessary. I'll handle it, and thank you for being honest with me, Adeline said as she turned to leave. She paused at the door, glancing back over her shoulder. Just remember to be responsible. Use protection. Cecilia's muttered response stopped her in her tracks. Of course. I don't want to get pregnant yet. Adeline froze for a moment, feeling a chill run down her spine. If Quinn were to hear even a fraction of this conversation, Arthur would find himself in an underground cell faster than he could draw his sword. She exhaled and shook her head, silently marveling at the sheer audacity of youth. There was no time to dwell on it now. She had a familiar job to do, the eternal role of mediator between a fiery daughter and an overprotective husband. And perhaps, somewhere in the chaos, find a way to maintain her own sanity. Chapter 5:18, Mothers 3. Going to the Eastern continent had been eventful. Eventful in more ways than I'd thought possible. And this conversation was proving to be one of the more challenging parts. "See Allah, your father ordered this," I said, keeping my voice firm despite the way her golden eyes blazed with defiance. "Ha, pulling out that card now?" She smacked her forehead in frustration, her black hair catching the afternoon light streaming through the window. "My home burns and you want me to leave? To abandon everything I've sworn to protect?" The pain in her voice cut deeper than any blade. I could see the conflict tearing at her, duty to family warring with loyalty to her homeland, the practical wisdom of survival battling against her fierce pride. Ciela had never been one to retreat, even when retreat was the wisest course. "Your home needs you alive to rebuild it," I said, stepping closer. "Not dead defending ashes." Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Those ashes are where my ancestors are buried. Where my people have lived for generations. You don't understand. I understand more than you think." My voice softened, remembering the ruins I'd walked through, the families I'd helped evacuate, the children who would never see their homes again. "I've seen what this war has cost. What it's taken from everyone." She turned away, gazing out at the scarred landscape visible through the window. The Muang family estate, once magnificent, now bore the marks of recent battles. Scorched earth where gardens had bloomed, broken walls where proud towers had stood. "The student conscription is over," I continued. "The official justification for keeping you here has ended. Your father isn't just protecting you, he's being strategic. The Windward family's protection means safety, resources, and most importantly, a future. A future that doesn't include my homeland," she said bitterly. "A future that could help you reclaim it." I moved to stand beside her, close enough to catch the familiar scent of jasmine in her hair. "The war is winding down, Ciela. With the vampire monarch dead at the martial king's hands, the tide has turned decisively in our favor." She glanced at me, surprise flickering across her features. "You really believe it's over?" "The worst of it, yes. But that means the rebuilding phase is coming, and rebuilding requires different skills than fighting. Political connections. Economic partnerships. The kind of influence that comes from having ties to powerful northern families." Her shoulders sagged slightly, some of the fight going out of her. "My father's always thinking 3 moves ahead. It's what's kept your family strong for centuries." I hesitated, then decided to take the leap that had been building in my chest since our dance at the banquet. "And it's not the only reason I want you to come north with me." She turned to face me fully, those golden eyes searching my face with an intensity that made my heart race. "Lucifer. I know the timing is terrible," I said, running a hand through my blonde hair. "I know everything is complicated and uncertain. But I can't let you leave without telling you how I feel." The words hung between us like a bridge neither of us had dared to cross before. We'd circled around this moment for weeks, stolen glances, touches that lingered too long, conversations that carried more weight than their words suggested. "We talked about this at the banquet," she said quietly. "The complications. I know about Dia. I know it's not simple." I took her hands in mine, marveling at how perfectly they fit despite the calluses from sword work. "But what I feel for you isn't diminished by that. If anything, it makes me more certain." Her breath caught. "Certain of what?" "That love isn't always convenient or simple. That sometimes the heart makes room for more than logic says it should." I lifted one hand to cup her cheek, my thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "I love you, Ciela. Completely. Desperately. In a way that makes me want to be worthy of the faith you place in me." Tears gathered in her eyes, catching the light like scattered gold. "Lucifer, you don't have to say anything now," I said quickly. "I just needed you to know. Before we leave this place, before everything changes, I needed you to understand that you're not just seeking sanctuary in the north. You're coming home to someone who loves you." She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze never leaving mine. Then, slowly, she smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from her since the evacuation orders came through. "You magnificent, impossible man," she whispered. "Of course I love you too." The words hit me like divine light, brilliant and warming and absolutely transformative. I didn't trust myself to speak, so instead I did what I'd been dreaming of for weeks. I kissed her. Her lips were soft and warm against mine, tasting faintly of the jasmine tea she favored. She melted into me, her arms coming up to circle my neck, her fingers tangling in my hair. The kiss deepened, carrying with it all the words we hadn't said, all the moments we'd held back, all the hope for whatever complicated future we might build together. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against mine. "This doesn't solve anything," she said, though she was smiling. "It solves the most important thing," I replied, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple. "Everything else we can figure out together." She laughed, the sound like music after the discord of war. "Together in the north, under your family's protection, while I learn to navigate whatever arrangement you work out with Dia." "If you're willing," I said, meaning it completely. "I'm willing to try." She pulled back enough to meet my eyes. "But I want to come back here someday. When the rebuilding is done, when it's safe. This will always be my home. Then I'll help you come back, I promised. Whatever it takes." 3 days later, we stood on the deck of the airship that would carry us to the northern continent, watching the eastern landscape disappear beneath clouds and distance. Ciela's hand was warm in mine, her black hair whipping in the wind as she took her last look at the land of her birth. No regrets? I asked softly. She squeezed my hand. Ask me again in a year. The journey north took the better part of a week, giving us time to settle into this new dynamic between us. We talked about everything and nothing, her fears about leaving, my concerns about integrating her into northern society, the delicate balance we'd need to strike with my family's expectations. But mostly, we simply enjoyed being together without the constant threat of battle or separation hanging over us. When the familiar spires of Windward City finally came into view, I felt the complex mix of emotions that always accompanied homecoming. Relief, anticipation, and a touch of anxiety about how my family would receive Ciela. The airship docked at the private terminal reserved for nobility, and I helped Ciela gather her few belongings. She'd left with almost nothing, a single trunk of clothes and personal items, her sword, and a small jade pendant that had belonged to her grandmother. Ready? I asked as the disembarkation ramp lowered. She straightened her shoulders, every inch the daughter of a great family despite her reduced circumstances. Ready. We descended together, my hand at the small of her back in a gesture that was both supportive and possessive. I'd sent word ahead that I was bringing a guest, but I hadn't been specific about who or why. I should have been more specific. Because standing at the bottom of the ramp, looking for all the world like they'd been waiting for hours, were two figures I hadn't expected to see together. My mother, Queen Helena Windward, stood with her usual regal bearing, her golden hair perfectly coiffed and her blue eyes bright with curiosity. She wore the kind of smile that suggested she knew more than she was letting on. And beside her, looking equally poised but with an edge of something I couldn't quite identify, stood Dia. Her golden eyes found mine immediately, and I felt my stomach drop as I realized the complexity of the situation I'd just walked into. Her red hair was braided back in the practical style she favored, and she wore traveling clothes that suggested she'd come here specifically to meet our arrival. Lucifer. My mother called, her voice carrying the warmth and authority that had ruled our household for decades. Welcome home, darling. And you must be Ciela. I felt Ciela tense beside me, her hand finding mine in a grip that was probably stronger than necessary. This was not how I'd planned to handle introductions. Mother, I managed, my voice only slightly strained. Dia. I wasn't expecting you both to be here. Dia's smile was perfectly polite, but her eyes held a complexity of emotions I couldn't begin to parse. I wanted to welcome our guest properly, she said, her gaze shifting to Ciela with unmistakable curiosity. After all, anyone important enough to bring home must be very special indeed. The weight of unspoken questions and future complications settled over us like a cloud. I squeezed Ciela's hand, hoping to convey reassurance I wasn't entirely sure I felt. Chapter 519, Mothers 4. I smiled from my position on the marble veranda, watching as my Lucy stood beside the Eastern girl, Ciela, if I'd heard correctly. They looked like they'd stepped straight from the pages of a political marriage brochure, poised, radiant, and entirely too unaware of how perfectly they complemented each other. His blonde hair caught the northern light like spun gold, while her raven-black locks provided a striking contrast, and the way they unconsciously mirrored each other's posture spoke of a connection deeper than mere attraction. Oh my, I murmured behind my hand, though I couldn't quite suppress the grin tugging at my lips. Not the delicate smile of a refined noblewoman, no, this was the calculating expression of a mother who sensed opportunity and was already mentally rearranging the wedding seating chart. Of course, I'd always known Lucy was exceptional. Every mother believes her child is special, but I had empirical evidence. Impeccable bloodlines stretching back centuries, combat records that made seasoned instructors weep with pride, refined etiquette mastered by age 6, and posture so perfect it could serve as a textbook illustration. But still, two extraordinary young women orbiting around him like celestial bodies drawn to a particularly bright star? That transcended mere charm. That was either destiny or suspicious fortune. My smile faltered slightly as a more sobering thought crept in. Someone had clearly been influencing my son, because while I had given birth to Lucifer Windward, I hadn't truly raised him in the traditional sense. That honor, or burden, depending on which family crisis we were weathering that particular year, had fallen to his father Arden and the rigid Windward educational tradition. And really, who was I to interfere? The Windwards had ruled the northern territories for generations, maintaining their grip on power without a whisper of scandal or even a slightly crooked ceremonial sword. So I had stepped back gracefully, observed from an appropriate distance, and trusted in centuries of proven methodology. But as Lucy matured, I began noticing the hairline fractures beneath all that polished perfection. He was brilliant, staggeringly so. The sort of prodigy that made other geniuses consider early retirement. But he was also vain, arrogant, too accustomed to being the most luminous presence in any room he entered. The problem with raising a child to excellence is that they begin to believe their own propaganda. And what exactly was I supposed to do? Scold him for being extraordinary? Ground him from achieving greatness? Then he lost. Publicly. Decisively. To Arthur Nightingale, of all people, a boy from a merchant family who had somehow clawed his way to the pinnacle of magical society through sheer determination and talent. The defeat had shattered something in Lucy that I hadn't even realized needed breaking. Afterward, he changed. Less preening, more genuine contemplation. Less smirking superiority, more authentic listening. He even began spending time with me, tentatively at first, awkwardly navigating the unfamiliar territory of actual mother-son interaction rather than the formal exchanges we'd maintained for years. We were slowly learning how to exist as family rather than simply two nobles connected by blood and protocol. And now here he stood, surrounded by remarkable individuals who clearly saw something in him worth their devotion. Better than remarkable, actually grounding influences who somehow managed to bring out his best qualities while tempering his worst impulses. Arthur Nightingale's influence, undoubtedly. I allowed myself a genuinely satisfied smile this time, tinged with maternal smugness. The kind that silently communicated, "I know exactly what you've done for my son, young man, and you have my eternal gratitude." "Lucy, darling," I called with the silky authority that had been negotiating noble politics since before he was born, "why don't you go find your father? I believe he's anxious to hear about your Eastern adventures. I'll look after Ceola and make sure she feels properly welcomed." He hesitated, bless his conflicted heart, his emerald eyes darting between us like a loyal hound told to choose between equally beloved masters. But he knew better than to argue with that particular tone, having learned years ago that maternal suggestions were rarely optional. He nodded reluctantly and departed, though not without a lingering glance that suggested he was torn between filial duty and protective instinct. At this rate, I mused privately, our family tree might sprout some fascinating new branches. A proper noblewoman doesn't indulge in such speculation, but a prospective mother-in-law operates under entirely different social guidelines. I turned to the two young women with the practiced warmth of a seasoned hostess and the barely contained glee of someone already planning an extensive series of intimate tea gatherings. "How about you both join me for refreshments?" I offered, my smile never wavering. "I'm absolutely dying to hear about your adventures in the East, and I suspect you both have fascinating stories to share." They exchanged a quick glance, the sort of wordless communication that suggested they were assessing potential diplomatic hazards before nodding with appropriate politeness. Excellent manners, both of them. That boded well for future family integration. I led them through the estate's main corridor, past the cascade of light glass chandeliers that caught and refracted the afternoon sun into prismatic rainbows, along the elegant bridgeway that spanned our central courtyard with its carefully maintained topiary arrangements. Our destination was the floating garden, a masterpiece of architectural ambition and magical engineering that never failed to impress visitors. Translucent platforms shimmered in the air above a grove of glimmer leaf trees, their surfaces stable as stone despite appearing gossamer thin. It was beautiful, undeniably regal, and most importantly for my current purposes, completely private. Perfect for tea service. Perfect for civilized conversation. Perfect for conducting the sort of delicate interrogation that would reveal exactly what manner of young women my son was allowing into his increasingly complex romantic orbit. As we settled onto cushioned chairs that floated at precisely the ideal height for comfortable conversation, I couldn't help but reflect on Arthur Nightingale's more challenging situation. The boy had become the world's most scandalous topic of drawing-room gossip, and not because of any impropriety, quite the opposite. His apparent ability to inspire devoted affection in multiple extraordinary women simultaneously had become the stuff of legend. For young ladies, by current count, 3 of them were princesses from 3 different continents, wielding the sort of political influence that could redraw continental borders. The 4th was the daughter of a marquis who happened to own the empire's largest and most successful necromancy corporation, hardly insignificant in terms of both wealth and magical connections. Her mother, I thought with genuine sympathy. Unlike myself, Queen Helena Windward, sovereign of the Northern Territories in my own right, she lacked the inherent authority to meet such formidable potential daughters-in-law as equals. My situation, while certainly complex, was far more manageable. Ceola represented one of the great Eastern families, bringing impeccable breeding and considerable political connections despite her current refugee status. Dia, while I still needed more information about her background, clearly possessed both magical talent and the sort of quiet confidence that suggested noble training. I could work with this. In fact, I was rather looking forward to it. "Now then," I said as the tea service materialized on our floating table, delicate porcelain cups, silver implements, and an array of pastries that represented the finest northern culinary traditions. "I do hope you'll indulge an old woman's curiosity about recent events. It's not every day my son returns from a continental war with such distinguished company." Ceola's golden eyes met mine directly, no shy ducking or diplomatic evasion. "Good. I appreciated straightforward communication." "Your Majesty is too kind," she replied with perfect formal courtesy. "Though I suspect you're far more interested in evaluating potential family additions than in hearing war stories." I laughed, a genuine sound of delighted surprise. "Oh, this one was sharp. Very sharp indeed." "My dear girl," I said, raising my teacup in a small salute, "I believe we're going to get along splendidly." Dia watched our exchange with the careful attention of someone learning the rules of a game she hadn't previously encountered. Interesting. That suggested her background might be less traditionally noble than I'd initially assumed. "So," I continued, settling back into my chair with the satisfied air of a predator who had just confirmed that her prey would provide excellent sport, "shall we discuss how exactly this arrangement is going to work?" Chapter 520, Mothers 5. The sound of the front door opening carried through the penthouse like a signal flare, followed by my father's distinctive footsteps, measured, confident, carrying the weight of someone who had built something substantial from nothing. I was in the kitchen helping my mother prepare dinner when I heard Aria's delighted shriek from the living room. "Dad's home." I set down the knife I'd been using to slice vegetables and made my way to the entrance hall, arriving just as my father dropped his travel bags and swept Arya into one of his legendary bear hugs. Douglas Nightingale wasn't a particularly large man, average height, lean build, the kind of person who could disappear into a crowd if he wanted to. But when he hugged you, it felt like, "There's my favorite daughter," he said, spinning her around despite her protests that she was too old for such treatment. "I'm your only daughter," Arya giggled, clinging to his shoulders. "Which makes you the favorite by default," he replied with the sort of logic that had probably served him well in business negotiations. When he finally set her down and turned to see me standing there, his expression shifted into something softer, more complex. Relief, joy, and something that might have been barely contained emotion flickered across his features. "Arthur," he said simply, but the single word carried the weight of weeks of worry. "Hello, Dad." He crossed the distance between us in 3 quick strides and pulled me into an embrace that was somehow both gentle and desperate. For a moment, I felt like a child again. Safe, protected, unconditionally loved. "Don't ever do that to us again," he murmured against my shoulder. "Your mother and I aged 10 years while you were gone." "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it. "I should have thought about what it would do to you." He pulled back to study my face, his hands still resting on my shoulders. "You look different. Older. More." He paused, searching for the right word. "Settled. Like you found something you were looking for." I considered that assessment. He wasn't wrong. The months in the East had changed me in ways I was still discovering. "Maybe I have." "Good." He smiled then, the expression transforming his tired features. "That's what growing up is supposed to do, I suppose. Though next time, maybe find yourself a little closer to home." "Deal?" I laughed, and the sound felt lighter than it had in months. My mother appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel, her face radiant with the kind of happiness that only came from having her entire family under one roof. "Dinner will be ready in an hour," she announced. "Douglas, go wash up. Arthur, finish helping me with the vegetables. Arya, set the table." "Yes, ma'am," we all replied in unison, the automatic response of a family well-trained in Alice Nightingale's domestic efficiency. The next few hours passed in the kind of peaceful domesticity I'd almost forgotten existed. My father regaled us with stories from his business trip, a series of meetings with potential guild partnerships that had apparently gone better than expected. The bronze-rank Guild Minerva was expanding, taking on more complex contracts, building a reputation that extended beyond the capital. After dinner, we migrated to the living room, where the evening settled into the comfortable rhythms of family life. My father claimed his favorite chair and immediately began sorting through accumulated mail. My mother curled up on the sofa with a book, though I noticed she spent more time watching us than reading. Arya, meanwhile, had produced a complex-looking puzzle from somewhere and was attempting to solve it while simultaneously trying to convince me to help. "It's supposed to be impossible," she said, holding up a crystalline structure that seemed to shift and change as the light hit it. "The Academy gave it to us as a logic exercise." "And you brought it home because?" I asked, settling beside her on the carpet. "Because impossible things are only impossible until someone figures them out," she replied with the sort of confidence that ran in our family like a genetic trait. I examined the puzzle more closely. It was elegantly designed, each facet catching and refracting light in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. "Have you tried approaching it as a mana-based lock rather than a purely mechanical one?" "Mana-based?" Arya's eyes lit up with interest. "I didn't even think about that possibility." "Here, let me show you." I placed my hand near the crystal structure, not quite touching, and let a small tendril of mana extend from my fingers. The reaction was immediate. Several of the crystal faces began to glow with soft internal light. "Oh," Arya breathed. "It's not a puzzle at all, is it? It's a diagnostic tool." "Clever girl." I ruffled her hair, which earned me an indignant swat. "It's designed to read and respond to different types of mana signatures. Each configuration probably reveals different information about the user's magical development." She snatched the device back with the possessive enthusiasm of someone who had just discovered a new favorite toy. "This is so much cooler than I thought. Wait until I show my classmates. Just don't let them know I helped," I said. "You'll get more credit if they think you figured it out yourself." "Good point." She grinned at me with the sort of conspiratorial expression that suggested she was already planning to leverage this knowledge for maximum social advantage. "You're actually pretty useful sometimes, for an older brother." "Sometimes." I feigned offense. "I'll have you know I'm consistently useful. Remember when you couldn't figure out that transformation equation for advanced theoretical magics?" "That was different," she protested. "That was actually impossible." "No, that was you being lazy and not wanting to do the foundational work." "I was not lazy." Arya's voice rose in indignation. I was efficiently allocating my study time. Is that what we're calling procrastination now? She launched herself at me with the sort of sibling warfare that had been perfected over years of practice. I deflected her attack easily, which only made her more determined to land at least one solid hit. "Children," our mother said mildly, not looking up from her book, though I could see her smile. "He started it," Arya declared, still trying to get past my defenses. "I merely pointed out a fact," I replied with the sort of dignity that was completely undermined by having to dodge her attempts to mess up my hair. "Your fact was rude. Truth often is. Arrogant jerk. Lazy procrastinator. That's enough, both of you," our father said. But his tone was warm with amusement rather than actual disapproval. "Arthur, stop antagonizing your sister. Arya, stop trying to murder your brother. We just got him back." We separated with the grudging compliance of siblings who knew they were being watched by authority figures. Arya flopped back onto the carpet with dramatic flair, while I straightened my shirt with as much dignity as I could muster. "I missed this," I said quietly, the admission slipping out before I could stop it. My mother's smile brightened, and my father nodded with understanding. "We missed you too," he said simply. Later that evening, after my parents had retired and Arya had finally been convinced to tackle her actual homework, I found myself alone on the penthouse balcony. The city spread out below me in a tapestry of lights and shadows, beautiful in the way that only distance could make urban sprawl appear. But I wasn't really seeing the view. Instead, I was turning my attention inward, examining the magical development that had been quietly progressing throughout my time in the Eastern Territories. I was at peak integration rank now. The sensation was unmistakable, a sense of completion, of having reached the absolute limit of what this particular tier of power could contain. My mana reserves felt compressed, dense, straining against boundaries that had once seemed impossibly distant. And beyond those boundaries I could sense it. The wall. Everyone knew about the wall. It was the legendary barrier that separated integration rank from ascendant rank, the obstacle that turned promising warriors into legends or broken dreams. Most people spent decades trying to overcome it. Many never managed it at all. I reached out with my consciousness, testing the edges of that barrier with the sort of careful attention a craftsman might give to examining a particularly challenging material. The wall felt substantial, dense, like trying to push through solid granite with bare hands. But not insurmountable. I frowned, probing deeper, searching for the complexity that had stymied so many powerful individuals. Where was the legendary impossibility? The crushing pressure that was supposed to break lesser minds? The mystical challenge that required years of preparation and perfect conditions to overcome? All I could sense was resistance. Significant resistance, certainly, but nothing that felt fundamentally different from other obstacles I'd encountered. It was like coming up against a particularly thick door. Challenging, requiring proper technique and sustained effort, but not mystical or transcendent. Just work. 7 months. Maybe 8 if I wanted to be cautious about it. The realization was almost disappointing. I supposed I should have felt more impressed, more humbled by the magnitude of the challenge. Instead, I found myself mentally organizing a training schedule, calculating resource requirements, and considering whether I wanted to make the breakthrough here in the capital or somewhere more private. The wall was just another obstacle. A significant one, certainly, but ultimately just another step on the path to greater power. Chapter 521. Coming of Age 1. Cecilia exhaled sharply, her frustration mounting as yet another dress joined the growing pile on the floor. "It's not good enough," she muttered, her sulk deepening. Around her, the maids bustled, their faces a mix of nervousness and determination, trying to appease the princess. Today wasn't just any day. It was special in ways that made her heart race and her mind whirl. And for once, Cecilia, always so composed, felt a flicker of something foreign. Badump, badump. Her heartbeat thrummed like a persistent drum, an unwelcome reminder of her nerves. She tried to dismiss it, but the thought of Arthur kept slipping into her mind, derailing every attempt at calm. Finally, after what felt like hours, she settled on a dress. It was a stunning backless black gown that contrasted perfectly with her sunlit blonde hair and her fair, creamy skin. The ruby necklace she chose added a touch of bold elegance, its fiery hue catching the light and complementing the crimson of her eyes. Matching ruby earrings completed the look, framing her face with just the right balance of regality and allure. Cecilia turned to the mirror, her reflection staring back with a mix of confidence and anticipation. For all her fussing, she couldn't deny that the ensemble was perfect. And tonight had to be perfect. Badump. After finishing her preparations, Cecilia stepped out of her room, her maids trailing dutifully behind her. She resisted the itch to check her phone, clasping her hands tightly as she made her way to meet her parents and older brother. Quinn Slatemark's expression darkened the moment he saw his daughter. His gaze swept over her gown, lingering on the daring design with visible disapproval. But before he could voice his thoughts, Adeline nudged him firmly, silencing any protest. He sighed, knowing exactly why Cecilia had chosen such an outfit. All because of that boy, Arthur. The mere thought of him soured Quinn's mood further. It wasn't just that Cecilia was utterly enamored. It was that the boy had somehow managed to entangle two other princesses in the same web. And, to top it all off, he was a nightingale. A nightingale. Quinn's jaw tightened, but he swallowed his words. He had endured enough lectures from Adeline about meddling in his daughter's affairs. She had made it clear. Cecilia's love life was hers to navigate, just as he had turned a blind eye to Valerian's. "You look every inch the young woman you've grown into, Cecilia," Adeline said warmly, her smile bright and genuine. Cecilia's eyes lit up at her mother's words, a small blush rising to her cheeks. Quinn, however, could only grumble inwardly, suppressing the urge to voice his misgivings. Instead, he folded his arms, silently watching his daughter, the picture of youthful elegance and determination, walk toward the life she was shaping for herself. The Slatemark imperial family made their way toward the grand hall, the very air around them steeped in regality. The towering doors swung open with a ceremonious creak, revealing the opulence within. As they entered, the speakers announced their arrival with a flourish, drawing every eye in the room. Quinn Slatemark came to a stop, his posture rigid, commanding the space as only an emperor could. His voice resonated across the hall, carrying the authority of a ruler but also the warmth of a father. "I would like to thank everyone for attending my daughter's coming-of-age ceremony. Please, enjoy the evening." Polite applause rippled through the crowd, but Quinn's attention was elsewhere. His sharp eyes swept over the familiar faces of dignitaries, nobles, and prodigies, scanning with purpose. They finally settled on the one person he sought, Arthur Nightingale. His gaze hardened, narrowing as he regarded the young man who had somehow ensnared the affection of not just his daughter but two other princesses. Quinn wanted to find fault. Any crack in the armor, any sign that the boy was unworthy of Cecilia. But it was proving to be a futile endeavor. Arthur stood as he always did, calm, poised, and exuding an air of quiet confidence. A young man who was both admired and feared, carrying the weight of his growing legend with startling ease. Try as he might, Quinn could not deny the truth. Arthur Nightingale was becoming a force in his own right. Reluctantly, Quinn allowed himself the faintest nod of approval, though it soured his mood further. The boy wasn't unworthy, but that didn't mean Quinn had to like him. Quinn took his seat on the gilded throne at the head of the room, his expression carefully composed, though his fingers tapped the armrest in irritation. Adeline slid into her chair beside him, casting him a knowing look. She said nothing, but her faint smirk spoke volumes. As the festivities began, Quinn leaned back slightly, observing the hall with the keen eye of both an emperor and a father. One thought lingered in his mind, sharper than any blade. "This isn't over, Nightingale." While Quinn scrutinized Arthur from his seat, Arthur and Cecilia prepared to take the floor for the first dance of the evening. The orchestra shifted seamlessly into a new melody, one unmistakably romantic, its gentle swells and lilting notes weaving an intimate atmosphere that set the mood for the couple. "An excellent choice, Princess," Arthur said with a subtle smirk as he knelt before her. His movements were fluid and precise, a mixture of decorum and charm that made the onlookers murmur with admiration. He touched her hand lightly and pressed a kiss to its back. "May I have the honor of this dance, Your Highness?" "You may," Cecilia replied, her smile bright and brimming with confidence. She placed her hand in his, and they stepped into position as the music swirled around them. Arthur's hand found its place at the small of her back, the soft fabric of her dress cool beneath his fingers. Or rather, what little of it there was. Her daring choice of a backless gown had not gone unnoticed. "So," Cecilia whispered as they moved in perfect synchrony, "how do you like the dress?" Arthur's pause was almost imperceptible, but the faint heat in his cheeks betrayed him. "It's nice," he admitted, his voice low and measured, though his expression spoke volumes more. Cecilia had always been bold, but something about her tonight seemed even more so, like a predator that had found the perfect moment to close in. Her confidence, mixed with Arthur's growing affection and the moments they'd shared in recent months, left her nearly irresistible. Arthur's eyes flicked downward, just for a moment, before returning to her face. Unfortunately for him, Cecilia noticed. Her smile curled into something self-assured and mischievous, a glimmer of triumph in her crimson eyes. "Well, you are a man and you are my man," she said with a wink, her voice a low purr. "So I don't mind if you look. Just don't let my father catch you." Arthur couldn't suppress a chuckle at her audacity, shaking his head slightly. You're impossible, you know that? I know, she said, her tone light but her gaze unwavering. And you love it. But still, let's keep things in check for now, Cecilia teased, her crimson eyes glinting with mischief. I'd hate for my father to string you up by your ankles in front of everyone. Can't have that, can we? Arthur sighed dramatically, shaking his head. Why did I have to fall for the daughters of the three most overprotective fathers in existence? Because I'm worth it? Cecilia shot back without hesitation, her tone smug yet playful. Don't you think so? Of course you are, Cece, Arthur said, his voice softening as he pulled her just a little closer. At this point, it's impossible to imagine my life without you, my devil. Her cheeks flushed a delicate pink, and her smile widened until it seemed to light up the entire ballroom. You're lucky we're in public, she whispered, her voice teasing but her eyes betraying the sincerity beneath. I'm this close to kissing you, Nightingale. So, before I cause a scandal, let's create some distance, shall we? Arthur nodded, a wry grin tugging at his lips as the final strains of the song faded into silence. They moved apart gracefully, still maintaining the perfect poise expected of them. You won't need to create distance later, Cecilia murmured under her breath, just loud enough for Arthur to hear. Her words carried a promise that left him momentarily stunned as they turned to bow to each other in perfect unison. The applause was polite and measured, but to Arthur, it was as though the world had narrowed to just the two of them. Chapter 522. Coming of Age, 2. After my dance with Cecilia, I shared the floor with Serafina, Rachel, and Rose in that order. Cecilia chose to remain at the edge of the hall, content to watch rather than take another turn or dance with anyone else. Her gaze never left me, a quiet sort of possessiveness radiating from her as she sipped from a delicate glass. Serafina, as always, was different. Where Rachel and Cecilia exuded boldness, or to be frank, a relentless flirtatious energy that bordered on insatiable, Serafina was quieter, her demeanor less fiery but no less compelling. It wasn't that she didn't enjoy our more intimate moments, she did. But she approached them with a sense of grace and restraint that contrasted starkly with the other two. Her crystalline blue eyes met mine, steady and calm. The shadow of her brother sun no longer loomed over her, and the difference was palpable. Where there had once been an undercurrent of tension, there was now serenity, a confidence that had been absent before. It will be hard, Serafina said at last, breaking the silence as we swayed to the soft rhythm of the music. What will be hard? I asked, tilting my head slightly. After my birthday? She said, her voice measured but tinged with something I couldn't quite place. I blinked in surprise. What do you mean? She hesitated, then lowered her voice, leaning in just enough for her words to be meant for me alone. You'll need to talk to my uncle. Convince him to distract my father. I nearly tripped over my own feet. Talk to her uncle? About that? Surely she couldn't be serious. Her uncle was my master, but he loved his niece as much as her father did. The idea was absurd enough to make me choke on a laugh that I quickly swallowed. Why can't you talk to him yourself? I asked, barely masking my incredulity. Serafina blinked, her cheeks turning a faint, rare shade of pink. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she admitted, I'm shy. For a moment I was stunned. Serafina Zenith, calm and collected. Shy? The absurdity of the situation was almost too much. I couldn't help the smile that crept onto my face as I shook my head. All right, I said, managing to keep my tone neutral despite the storm of thoughts in my head. I'll see what I can do. The softest of smiles graced her lips, and I realized I'd do far more than just talk to her uncle if it meant seeing her like this. I missed having you to myself, Arthur, Serafina whispered, her voice soft yet resolute as we moved in rhythm across the floor. Her crystalline blue eyes held a rare vulnerability, a quiet plea she didn't often voice. Come back to the East and I'll treat you well. I hesitated for a moment, giving her the honest answer she deserved. I'll see about it after scaling the wall, Sarah. She pouted, her expression both endearing and stubborn, before nodding with a reluctant sigh. All right, then scale it fast. Anything for you, I replied with a small, reassuring smile. The song drew to a close, and I let go of her hand with a light bow. Next, I turned to Rachel Creighton, the future saintess, or so they called her already, thanks to her tireless efforts against the Shadow Seekers in the north and her critical role in the reclamation of Warian. She approached me with a radiant smile, her energy infectious as she all but skipped into my arms. Arthur, she sang, her voice playful and warm as we began our dance. I raised an eyebrow, catching a slight shift in her demeanor. Did the saintess indulge in underage drinking? I asked, my tone dry but laced with amusement. Rachel giggled, the sound light and unguarded. No, she replied with an exaggerated shake of her head. her golden locks bouncing. I just like you so much, you know? I couldn't help but smile, her sheer enthusiasm disarming. Rachel had a way of making even the simplest moments feel grand. Her zest for life a constant force that lifted those around her. As we twirled to the music, I felt the weight of her affection. A warmth that was as humbling as it was undeniable. Honestly, I'm a bit sad I have to give you up to Cecilia for today, Rachel said, her tone light but carrying a hint of genuine disappointment. But I'll manage, since you're definitely not escaping during my birthday. I raised an eyebrow at her confidence. What about your father and sister? I asked, thinking of Alastair Creighton. He and I were on good terms, but I doubted he'd be thrilled about me being involved with Rachel, especially considering her past. Rachel's expression turned resolute. I'll deal with them, she said firmly, her sapphire eyes glinting with determination. They're not going to keep you from me. I shook my head, half in amusement and half in disbelief. At this point, they should revise the epithet you'll earn when you reach ascendant rank. She shot me a pointed look. Well, that's your fault, she said, her tone accusing but playful. How exactly is this my fault? I asked, genuinely curious. Her expression turned thoughtful, almost earnest, and it caught me off guard. All boys like the innocent girl in public but a bad girl in private, don't they? She asked, tilting her head slightly as if pondering some universal truth. And, well, you brought that out of me because you're such a eunuch sometimes. At this rate, even Serafina might start doing the same. I blinked, completely thrown off by her unexpected candor. I don't even know how to respond to that, I admitted. Rachel just laughed, the sound warm and carefree, as if she'd won some unspoken battle. And perhaps she had. Maybe let go of your inhibitions sometimes? She murmured, her voice as soft as a breeze. You'll find out during your birthday what happens when I do, I replied in a low voice, meeting her gaze. Rachel's cheeks flushed a deep crimson, but the mischievous glint in her eyes was unmistakable as she broke into another bright smile. The dance ended with a slight bow from both of us, though her expression lingered in my mind. Finally, I approached Rose Springshaper, who had been waiting with characteristic patience at the edge of the dance floor, where the others had claimed their dances with varying degrees of enthusiasm and boldness. Rose maintained her composed elegance, though I could see the anticipation in her brown eyes. My turn at last, she said with a gentle smile, offering her hand with the refined grace that had been drilled into her since childhood. As we began to move together, I was struck by how naturally we fell into sync. Rose's movements were fluid, practiced, each step a testament to years of formal training. But beneath the technical perfection, there was something more personal, a warmth that she reserved only for moments like these. You know, she said quietly, her voice carrying just a hint of her usual teasing tone. Watching you dance with the others was quite educational. Educational how? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Each of them brings out a different side of you, she observed, her brown eyes studying my face with the analytical precision she usually reserved for her alchemical work. With Serafina, you're gentle, almost protective. With Rachel, you match her energy but temper her wildness. With Cecilia, she paused, a small smile playing at her lips. With Cecilia, you look like you're constantly trying to stay one step ahead of whatever she's planning. And with you, I asked, genuinely curious about her assessment. Rose's smile softened, becoming something more intimate than her usual composed expression. With me, you relax, like you don't have to be anyone other than yourself. The observation caught me off guard with its accuracy. There was something about Rose's presence that had always felt safe. Not in the sense of being less passionate or intense than the others, but in the way that allowed me to simply exist without constantly navigating complex emotional currents. I've been thinking about what you said, she continued, her voice dropping to a whisper meant only for my ears, about not letting fear hold me back. And I've decided you're right. Her grip on my hand tightened slightly, a gesture of resolve. I want to be part of this, of us, completely, not holding back, not second-guessing every feeling. I spun her gently, drawing her back close as the music swelled around us. Rose, I know it's complicated, she said quickly, anticipating my concerns. I know there are 4 of us and that's not exactly conventional. But when have any of us ever been conventional? She had a point, looking around at the other 3, each remarkable in their own way, each bringing something unique to whatever this arrangement was becoming. Conventional seemed like the last word anyone would use to describe our situation. As our dance concluded and I bowed to her with the same courtesy I'd shown the others, I couldn't help but marvel at how different yet complementary they all were. Each dance had been a reminder of why I'd fallen for them in the first place, and why the thought of choosing between them felt impossible. After the dances, I found myself mingling with Serafina, Rachel, Rose, and Cecilia, the four of them chatting and laughing while I did my best to remain inconspicuous. Well, as inconspicuous as one could be while avoiding the laser-focused gaze of Quinn Slatemark and trying not to think about the various parental figures who were undoubtedly taking note of tonight's proceedings. The sight of Rose fitting so naturally into the group dynamic, her gentle humor balancing Rachel's exuberance and tempering some of Cecilia's more outrageous comments, felt right in a way that was both surprising and inevitable. Ignoring the gaze of a radiant ranker was about as effective as hiding in plain sight, but it gave me the illusion of control over the situation. I chose to cling to that. As the banquet slowly wound down, the hum of conversation dulled, and the atmosphere grew more subdued. Guests began departing in small groups, the grand hall emptying in measured waves. "Come with me?" Cecilia whispered, her fingers lacing through mine before I could even register her words. Her touch was warm and firm, leaving no room for hesitation. I glanced briefly at Rachel, Serafina, and Rose, giving them a parting wave that earned me knowing looks from all three, before Cecilia gently tugged me along. As we slipped past the dwindling crowd, she leaned closer. "Hide us with your mana," she whispered, her voice almost inaudible. I frowned slightly. "Your father will notice," I warned. The idea of cloaking ourselves was appealing, but I knew the limits of my current abilities. A radiant ranker like Quinn would see through it in an instant. "Just worry about hiding us from ascendant rankers and below," she replied, her tone filled with unshakable confidence. I hesitated for a moment but nodded, weaving a subtle veil of mana around us. It wouldn't fool the likes of Quinn, but it would be enough to evade lesser eyes. As the veil settled into place, Cecilia's crimson eyes sparkled with delight. She squeezed my hand and whispered, "Trust me. Tonight we'll only have to deal with each other." Chapter 523. Coming of Age, 3. Our 18. "Finally," Cecilia exhaled, a mix of relief and exhilaration escaping her lips as we slipped unnoticed into her lavish bedroom. She shut the door behind us and leaned against it for a moment before turning to me with a mischievous smile. Without warning, she gave me a gentle push, and I found myself sitting on the edge of her bed, blinking up at her. "Wait here," she said, her voice tinged with anticipation. Before I could respond, she disappeared into the adjoining bathroom, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a rapidly quickening heartbeat. Ba-dump, ba-dump. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady the rhythm in my chest. This wasn't uncharted territory for me. In my past life, I'd been through this before, but this life, this world, was different. I'd spent almost 3 years here, and this moment felt monumental in a way that defied explanation. And then there was Cecilia Slatemark herself. Princess. Stunningly beautiful. Did I mention beautiful? Because she was. Utterly, distractingly beautiful. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to rein in my adolescent thoughts. "Focus, Arthur," I muttered under my breath. "You're not a child." I glanced toward the bathroom door, the sound of running water in the background only amplifying the tension in the room. "Luna," I called out mentally. "Disconnect from my senses for a while." "Understood." Luna's calm response echoed in my mind. "I'll remain dormant unless you need me or sense danger." The subtle weight of her presence lifted from my consciousness, leaving me alone with my thoughts. It was a peculiar relief, like clearing a fog from my mind. "All right," I whispered to myself. "Calm down. You can handle this." But calming down proved futile when the bathroom door creaked open moments later. Cecilia stepped out, her golden hair cascading over her shoulders and her slender figure wrapped in a delicate white one-piece lingerie. She stood there, the faintest hint of nervousness in her eyes as she awaited my reaction. I stared, my breath catching in my throat. "Wow," was all I managed to say. Her lips curved into a playful smirk, though I caught the flicker of relief in her expression. "I'll take that as a compliment," she said, her confidence returning as she crossed the room to join me. Climbing onto the bed, she leaned in close, her crimson eyes locking onto mine. "You made me wait so long for this," she murmured, her voice soft yet edged with teasing reproach. And then she kissed me. It was deep, electric, and impossible to ignore, her warmth drawing me into the moment entirely. My heart raced again, and this time I didn't bother trying to slow it down. I held Cecilia close as our lips met, her warmth a comfort against the cool air of the room. She straddled my lap, her arms wrapped around my neck, and her breath mingled with mine as we pulled apart, both slightly panting. "Are you worried?" I asked gently, brushing a strand of golden hair from her face. Her crimson eyes met mine as she nodded. "A little. I read online it can hurt the first time." I placed a reassuring hand on her cheek, my thumb tracing soft circles. "I'll be gentle," I promised. A sly smirk spread across her lips, the earlier nervousness replaced by her characteristic boldness. "Just make sure I can't walk tomorrow, Arthur." Otherwise, you're not leaving this room." Her words hung in the air, a challenge and a confession all at once, as we melted into each other's embrace, letting the rest of the world fade away. Our 18 content below. Arthur's hands gripped Cecilia's hips tightly as he pulled her flush against him, his hard length pressing insistently against the damp lace of her lingerie. She could feel every inch of him, even through the fabric, and it sent a shiver of anticipation down her spine. Cecilia's hands slid up Arthur's chest, feeling the firm muscles beneath his shirt. She could sense his desire, his need for her, and it only fueled her own growing hunger. Their lips met in a heated kiss, tongues tangling as they lost themselves in the moment. Arthur's hands slid down to squeeze the round globes of Cecilia's ass, kneading them through the thin lace of her panties. She gasped into his mouth, her hips rocking instinctively against his, as she felt his hardness throb against her core. "Arthur," she panted, breaking the kiss to gaze up at him with hooded eyes. "I can feel you. You're so hard." Her voice was a mix of awe and desire, a hint of nervousness lurking beneath the surface. Arthur's eyes darkened with lust as he looked down at her, taking in the sight of her flushed cheeks and kiss-swollen lips. "You're playing with fire, princess," he murmured, his voice a low, seductive rumble. "Keep teasing me like this, and I won't be able to hold back." His hands slid around to grip her thighs, his fingers digging into her soft flesh. Cecilia's breath caught in her throat as she felt Arthur's hard length pressing more insistently against her, the lace of her panties dampening further. She knew she was treading on dangerous ground, but the thrill of surrendering to his desire was too intoxicating to resist. Unable to help herself, Cecilia reached down, her fingers brushing over the hard bulge straining against Arthur's pants. She could feel the size of him, the shape of him, and a sudden, overwhelming curiosity consumed her. With a newfound boldness, she unbuttoned his pants, her heart pounding as she slowly pulled down the zipper. Arthur's penis sprang free, thick and hard and larger than anything Cecilia had ever seen. Her eyes widened as she took in the impressive sight, a mix of awe and trepidation washing over her. "Arthur," she breathed. You're so big." She swallowed hard, her confidence wavering for just a moment before she steeled herself. "I want to taste you," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. And with that, Cecilia leaned in, her lips brushing against the sensitive head of Arthur's penis. She could feel the heat of him, the weight of him, and it sent a fresh surge of desire coursing through her body. Cecilia's heart raced as she gazed up at Arthur, his intense gaze burning into hers. Slowly, tentatively, she leaned in, her lips brushing against the swollen head of his penis. The skin was soft and hot, and she could feel it twitch against her lips, as if responding to her touch. Arthur's hand came to rest on the back of her head, his fingers threading through her blonde hair. "That's it, princess," he encouraged, his voice a low, seductive murmur. "Take me into your mouth, nice and slow." His thumb brushed over her bottom lip, a silent urging. Cecilia parted her lips, her tongue darting out to taste the bead of moisture that had gathered at the tip of Arthur's penis. The flavor was salty and musky, unlike anything she had ever tasted before. She savored it for a moment before taking the head into her mouth, her lips stretching around his girth. Arthur let out a low groan, his head falling back as he felt the warmth of Cecilia's mouth envelop him. "Fuck, Cecilia," he grunted, his hips rocking slightly as he fought the urge to thrust forward. "Your mouth feels incredible." His hand tightened in her hair, guiding her head as she began to bob slowly up and down. Cecilia took a bit more of him into her mouth with each pass, her inexperienced tongue swirling and flicking against his sensitive skin. She had learned the basics from watching online videos, but the reality of having Arthur's penis in her mouth was far more intense than she had imagined. As she took him deeper, she felt the head of his penis hitting the back of her throat, and she gagged slightly. Tears sprang to her eyes as she tried to relax her throat, to breathe through her nose as the videos had instructed. Arthur felt her hesitation, and he gentled his grip on her hair. "Shoo, it's okay," he soothed, his voice a low rumble. "Take a deep breath through your nose, princess. You're doing so well." His other hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a stray tear. Emboldened by his words, Cecilia tried again, taking Arthur a bit deeper as she relaxed her throat. She could feel every ridge and vein of his penis as it slid over her tongue, the texture unlike anything she had ever felt before. She hollowed her cheeks and sucked gently, marveling at the way Arthur's penis throbbed and pulsed in her mouth. Arthur's breath came in short, sharp gasps as Cecilia found her rhythm. Her inexperience was evident in her clumsy movements, but her enthusiasm more than made up for it. "That's it, baby," he praised, his voice strained with pleasure. "Just like that. Your mouth feels fucking incredible." His hips began to rock in time with her movements, his hand guiding her head as she took him deeper and deeper into her throat. Chapter 524. Coming of Age? 4. R18. Arthur's hands gripped Cecilia's shoulders, lifting her effortlessly to her feet. In one fluid motion, he spun her around and pressed her back against the wall, his muscular body pinning her in place. His lips found her neck, kissing and biting as he marked her as his own. Cecilia gasped, her head thudding against the wall as Arthur's teeth grazed her sensitive skin. She could feel the hard length of him pressing against her stomach, his arousal evident in every movement. Her own body responded, heat pooling between her thighs as her confidence wavered under his dominance. Arthur's hands slipped between their bodies, his fingers tracing the damp lace of Cecilia's panties. He could feel the heat radiating from her core, and it only fueled his desire. Cecilia's breath hitched as she felt the cool air hit her exposed skin as Arthur's fingers went under her lingerie. She was acutely aware of Arthur's gaze on her most intimate areas, and a flush spread across her chest and face. Her hands came up to grip his shoulders, her nails digging into his flesh as she fought to maintain some semblance of control. Arthur's fingers brushed against the soft folds of her pussy, teasing and exploring. He could feel her virgin tightness, and it only made him more determined to claim her. Slowly, he inserted one finger, his eyes locked on hers as he watched her reaction. Cecilia's back arched off the wall, a soft moan escaping her lips as she felt Arthur's finger breach her. The sensation was intense, a mix of pleasure and a slight burning as her body stretched to accommodate him. "Arthur," she gasped, her voice a breathy whisper. Her hips bucked instinctively, seeking more of his touch. Arthur's lips captured hers in a searing kiss as he slowly inserted a second finger, stretching her further. He could feel her inner walls clenching around him, her body fighting against the intrusion even as it craved more. "You're so tight, baby," he murmured against her lips. His thumb found her clit, rubbing slow circles as he fingered her, bringing her closer and closer to the edge of ecstasy. Arthur paused, his fingers still buried deep inside Cecilia, as he felt her walls flutter around him. He watched her face, taking in the flush of her cheeks and the desperation in her eyes as she sought more of his touch. A wicked grin spread across his face as he slowly withdrew his fingers, leaving her aching and empty. Arthur reached for the hem of his shirt and pulled it over his head, tossing it aside. Cecilia's eyes widened as she took in the sight of his muscular torso, her gaze tracing the defined lines of his abs. She licked her lips, a surge of desire coursing through her at the sheer male beauty before her. Arthur's hands slid up her sides, his fingers hooking into the straps of her lingerie. With a sharp tug, he pulled it down, baring her breasts to his hungry gaze. He took a moment to admire the sight of her, naked and wanting, before leaning in to capture one rosy peek in his mouth. Cecilia gasped, her back arching as Arthur's tongue swirled around her nipple. Her fingers tangled in his hair, holding him close as jolts of pleasure shot through her. "Arthur," she whimpered. "Please." Arthur released her breast with a pop, a satisfied smirk on his face. "It's your turn, princess," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. Quickly, he divested her of the rest of her lingerie, leaving her as bare as he was. Arthur reached for a condom, his eyes never leaving hers as he rolled it over his thick length. He stepped closer, one hand gripping her hip as the other guided his penis to her entrance. With a slow, steady pressure, he began to push forward, the head of his penis breaching her virgin folds. Cecilia's breath caught in her throat as she felt the stretch, the slight burn as Arthur's size demanded her body yield to him. Her nails dug into his shoulders, her eyes squeezing shut as inch by inch, he slowly pushed deeper. It was a tight fit, his girth straining her untouched walls as he claimed her. Arthur paused, giving her a moment to adjust as he bottomed out inside her. He could feel her heart pounding against his chest, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. "You okay, baby?" he asked softly, his voice a low murmur. At her nod, he began to move, his hips pulling back slowly before pushing forward again, claiming her fully. Arthur's hips snapped forward, his thick length driving deep into Cecilia's tight heat. She gasped, her back arching off the bed as he filled her completely. His hands gripped her hips, fingers digging into her soft flesh as he set a punishing pace, each thrust harder than the last. Cecilia's legs wrapped around Arthur's waist, her heels digging into the small of his back as she met him thrust for thrust. Her confident demeanor had all but disappeared, replaced by a desperate need for more of him. "Arthur," she moaned, her voice breathy and wanton. "Harder, please. I need more." Her nails raked down his back, leaving red trails in their wake. Arthur growled, his control slipping as he gave in to her plea. He slammed into her with renewed vigor, the bed creaking loudly beneath them as their bodies crashed together. Sweat slicked their skin, the air thick with the scent of sex and arousal. For what felt like an eternity, they moved together, their bodies in perfect sync. Arthur's hips pistoned into Cecilia, his penis hitting that sweet spot deep inside her with every thrust. She could feel the pleasure building, her inner walls clenching around him as she teetered on the edge of ecstasy. Arthur's hips jerked erratically as he buried himself deep inside Cecilia, his penis throbbing and pulsing as he found his release. Cecilia cried out, her inner walls clamping down around him like a vice as her own powerful orgasm crashed over her. Their bodies shuddered together, lost in the throes of shared ecstasy. As the waves of pleasure slowly subsided, Cecilia collapsed against Arthur's chest, her heart pounding in time with his. She could feel the stickiness of their mixed fluids between her thighs, a testament to their passionate lovemaking. A satisfied smile played at the corners of her mouth as she gazed up at him, her eyes soft and hazy. Arthur's hand stroked her hair, his fingertips tracing the delicate curve of her cheek. He could feel the contentment radiating from her, and it filled him with a sense of male pride. But as he looked into her eyes, he felt a familiar stirring within his loins, his penis beginning to harden once more inside her. Cecilia's eyes widened in surprise as she felt Arthur's renewed arousal. She shifted her hips, gasping softly as his length throbbed against her sensitive walls. "Arthur?" she breathed, a mix of awe and disbelief coloring her tone. "How are you? You're still?" She couldn't finish the thought. Arthur's hands gripped Cecilia's hips tightly, his fingers sinking into the soft flesh as he held her close. He could feel his penis, already hard and ready once more, throbbing against her stomach. With a wicked grin, he rolled them over, leaving Cecilia beneath him as he loomed above her. "Cecilia," he murmured, his voice a low, seductive rumble. "Go on top." His eyes blazed with desire as he looked down at her, his penis pointing up towards the ceiling, hard and eager. Cecilia's heart raced at the command in Arthur's tone. She reached for a condom, her fingers trembling slightly as she tore open the packet. Slowly, she rolled the latex sheath over Arthur's thick length, marveling at the way it pulsed beneath her touch. Once the condom was in place, Arthur lay back against the pillows, his muscular torso on full display. He guided Cecilia to straddle his hips, his hands gripping her thighs as he positioned her above his straining erection. With a deep breath, Cecilia lowered herself onto Arthur, a soft moan escaping her lips as she felt him stretch her once more. She braced her hands against his chest, her nails digging into his skin as she began to ride him with slow, sensual undulations of her hips. The room filled with the sounds of their passion, the slap of skin on skin, their ragged breaths, and the occasional cry of pleasure. Cecilia's head fell back, her blonde hair cascading down her bare shoulders as she chased her release. Arthur's hips bucked upward, meeting her thrust for thrust as he drove deeper into her welcoming heat. Their bodies moved in perfect sync, the pleasure building to an almost unbearable intensity. With a final, desperate cry, Cecilia's inner walls clenched around Arthur's penis as she came undone. Her orgasm triggered his own, and he gripped her hips tightly as he pulsed inside her, his release spilling into the condom. As the aftershocks of their shared climax subsided, Cecilia collapsed onto Arthur's chest, her body spent and satisfied. But even as she lay there, panting and flushed, she could feel Arthur's penis beginning to harden once more inside her. She lifted her head, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of disbelief and renewed desire. Arthur took out yet another condom to put on his penis. His lips curled into a grin as he flipped them over, pinning Cecilia beneath him. "Round 3, princess," he murmured, his voice husky with need. "And this time, I'm not stopping until you beg me to." With that, he began to move once more, his hips setting a relentless pace as he claimed her for yet another round of passionate lovemaking. Chapter 525. Coming of Age. 5. The morning light filtered through the curtains when I stirred, though calling it morning felt generous given what my phone displayed when I reached for it with sluggish fingers. The glowing screen greeted me with the time, 1 p.m. I stared at the numbers, momentarily disoriented. I couldn't remember the last time I'd slept this long, if ever. My body had been attuned to 6 hours of rest since my early training days, no more, no less. It was a discipline that had served me well through countless challenges. But apparently Cecilia had managed to exhaust even my enhanced constitution. "Did we really fall asleep at 7? I muttered, running a hand through my disheveled hair as fragments of the previous night drifted back through my consciousness. Beside me, Cecilia stirred like a contented cat, her golden locks splayed across the silk pillow like rays of captured sunlight. Her arms instinctively wrapped around my waist as she nestled closer, a serene expression softening features that were usually animated with mischief or determination. Even in sleep, She seemed to radiate that particular confidence that made her so captivating. I smiled despite myself, unable to help the warmth that spread through my chest at the sight. She looked so peaceful, so different from the teasing, boldly provocative woman she had been throughout the night. There was something almost vulnerable about her like this, though I suspected she'd hex me if I ever described her that way while she was awake. Gently, I ran the back of my fingers along her cheek, marveling at the softness of her skin and the way she unconsciously leaned into the touch. Her crimson eyes fluttered open at the contact, and a sleepy but thoroughly satisfied grin spread across her lips. "Arthur?" she murmured, her voice still thick with drowsiness as she caught my hand. To my surprise, though perhaps I should have expected it by now, she brought one of my fingers to her lips and gave it a deliberately provocative lick, her eyes never leaving mine. I chuckled, shaking my head at her incorrigible nature. "Good morning to you too. Are you not tired? Mentally?" "Not at all." She stretched languidly, every movement deliberate and graceful despite what we'd put each other through. "Physically." She paused, testing her range of motion with a theatrical wince before smirking at me with unmistakable satisfaction. "Let's just say you definitely did your job. I genuinely can't walk properly, and I have the distinct feeling I won't be able to for the rest of the day." Her words made me laugh, a sound mixed with pride and slight concern. I leaned down to kiss her forehead, tasting the faint salt of dried sweat. "Good," I whispered, though part of me wondered if I should feel guilty about her condition. "Though I have to say," Cecilia continued, propping herself up on one elbow to study my face with those penetrating crimson eyes, "your stamina is absolutely ridiculous, like unnaturally so. Are you sure you're entirely human?" "Cece." "Don't Cece me," she interrupted, though her tone was playful rather than accusatory. "I'm not complaining, quite the opposite, actually. I'm just saying that if this is what you're like right now, I'm genuinely curious what you'll be capable of in the future. The other girls might need to start taking turns just to survive. How about you join me and my family for lunch?" Cecilia asked as she began to move more purposefully, stretching her arms above her head with an elegance that somehow made even her winces look graceful. "What?" I blinked, the sudden topic change catching me off guard. "Come on now," she said, fixing me with that look that brooked no argument. "My father already knows something's up. This isn't some fleeting dalliance we can pretend never happened. Is it?" The weight of her words settled over me like a lead blanket. She was right, of course. We'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, entered territory that had permanent consequences. "I don't think this is the best timing, Cece." She narrowed her eyes, the expression transforming her from satisfied lover to imperial princess in an instant. "Arthur, you can't avoid my father forever. Now that we've taken this step, you're going to marry me eventually. That means dealing with him as your future father-in-law. Or were you planning to run away from this responsibility?" The casual way she mentioned marriage sent my pulse racing for entirely different reasons than our earlier activities. "You know I love you, Cece." Her expression immediately softened into a victorious smile that reminded me exactly why she was so dangerous. "Good. Then get dressed, and help me with mine while you're at it. I'm going to need assistance with some of the more intricate fastenings." I raised an eyebrow. "Can't you just use mana to dress yourself?" She rolled her eyes dramatically, her lips forming that particular pout that made her look younger and more vulnerable than her usual commanding presence. "Mana's not exactly helpful when it comes to untangling the aftermath of activities like ours. And let's be honest, we couldn't exactly have done what we did using mana manipulation, could we? Some things require a more hands-on approach." Her words hung in the air with typical Cecilia boldness, matter-of-fact yet laced with the kind of intimate knowledge that made my thoughts scatter in several directions at once. I shook my head with a laugh, already resigned to whatever chaos she had planned for the day. "Besides," she continued, standing carefully and testing her balance, "I rather like the idea of you helping me dress. It feels appropriately domestic, like we're already married." "Don't get ahead of yourself," I said, though I was already moving to assist her. "Oh, I'm not getting ahead of anything," she replied with serene confidence. "I'm simply acknowledging the inevitable. By the way, you can stare as much as you want now. You're the one man who's allowed to." I groaned, shaking my head at her shameless boldness. "You shouldn't tease me when you're so sore, Cece. That's not exactly fair play." She rolled her eyes with theatrical exasperation. "Oh, and like you didn't spend months teasing me endlessly, only to set that ridiculous rule about waiting until we became adults? Deal with it, you hypocritical, horny boy. Consider this my revenge for all those times you left me frustrated and wanting." I sighed, recognizing the truth in her accusation. "Fair enough," I muttered, moving to help her with the complex lacings of her undergarments. The process was intimate in a different way than our earlier passion. Careful, tender, requiring communication and trust as I helped her into garments designed more for appearance than practicality. Between her pointed observations about my technique and the occasional soft sound of discomfort she tried to hide, we managed to get her into a sleek, elegant outfit that perfectly balanced her natural confidence with a subtle softness appropriate for a family lunch. "We clean up nicely," I said once I dressed myself, examining our reflection in the full-length mirror that dominated one wall of her chambers. Cecilia nodded approvingly, adjusting the ruby necklace that served as the final touch to her polished appearance. "No one would guess what we spent the night doing. Though, of course, I wouldn't mind the world knowing about us." "Let's keep that between us for now," I replied, trying not to think about how her father had probably already drawn his own conclusions. "First time meeting your girlfriend's father?" Cecilia asked, her tone carrying that playful edge that usually preceded trouble. Technically, I'd navigated similar situations in my previous life, but this was indeed uncharted territory in my current existence. "Not just that," I replied, rubbing the back of my neck. "Your father happens to be the emperor of the most powerful nation on the continent, and let's say I've crossed several significant boundaries with the daughter he treasures above all else." Cecilia smirked, patting me on the back with mock sympathy that did nothing to ease my growing anxiety. "Well, congratulations, Arthur. You've really outdone yourself this time. And guess what? There's absolutely no escaping this now. You're committed, whether you're ready or not." I sighed, already dreading the impending encounter with a man who could order my execution with a casual gesture. She, however, seemed completely unbothered by the prospect, casually pulling out her phone to summon her personal maids for final preparations. Watching her calm confidence in the face of what felt like impending doom, I couldn't help but wonder if she was enjoying my discomfort far too much. Then again, knowing Cecilia, that was probably exactly the point.